Welcome back to Goofy Harry. Today's adventure. What if Harry Potter was marked as the favored mortal of Nemesis, goddess of revenge? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The thing about a quiet ledger Nemesis would tell you is that it does not need ink. It does not need pages. It needs only an attentive accountant and a world that insists on producing entries. She had been an attentive accountant for 11 years. Privet Drive was orderly the way an unswept floor is orderly. You had only to look at the corners. From the corners of number 4, she had logged a column of cruelties so bland and constant that it took the patience of a goddess to keep it tidy. Cruelty does not always announce itself. It is sometimes a Tuesday morning sigh aimed at a child's hair. It is the way a spoon is set down a fraction harder than required. It is the use, 3,041 separate times, of the word boy by an aunt who knows the child's name. She had not interfered. Nemesis had been at this longer than the line of British kings, and she had a rule. Mortals must reap what they sow themselves. She did not pluck and place. She did not orchestrate. She watched and she remembered, and when at last a debt fell due, the world, which was on her side in this if in nothing else, paid it. Her favor was not a gift. It was an absence. The absence, suddenly, of luck. She had not in 11 years of watching given Petunia Dursley the absence of luck. Tonight she would. It was the 31st of July, 1991. The clock on the mantel of number 4 reported, at the moment Nemesis chose, 11 seconds past midnight. The clock was 3 minutes fast. Nemesis allowed for that. She allowed for everything. In the cupboard under the stairs, a thin boy in glasses repaired with tape was, as ever, awake. Boy. Vernon's voice carried down the stairs the way sound carries through poorly laid plaster, with all the bass intact and none of the shape. Harry sat up. He was good at sitting up. He had the trick of doing it without stretching, because stretching meant his elbows touching the walls and his elbows touching the walls meant the morning starting before he was ready. Boy, get up. He swung his legs out because there was no other option. He had learned, fairly young, that there was rarely another option. He did the math of his day on the spot, a habit he had picked up from an aunt who was, in her way, a small business owner with a child as inventory. The routine had 3 columns: tasks set, tasks accomplished, demerits accrued. He aimed each morning to keep the 3rd column lighter than the 2nd. He had a respectable streak lately. Boy, it's nearly 8. It was, by any honest clock, 6. He didn't say so. He pulled his door, which was not really a door because he did not own its hinges, open. He blinked into the kitchen light. Petunia was at the stove. Petunia was always at the stove. Her hair was pinned. Her apron was crisp. Her mouth was the mouth she put on each morning when she walked into the kitchen, and Harry, by long observation, had concluded the mouth was the actual apron of her, the thing she tied on each day to keep the rest of her from spilling. Bacon, she said without looking, and don't burn it. Yes, Aunt Petunia, don't sass. I didn't, and don't talk back. He moved to the stove. The bacon hissed. The clock ticked. The morning began. What no one in the kitchen of number 4 could see, though one of them was standing in the room in a sense the room did not have words for, was the woman by the door. She was, briefly, formal. She wore a long charcoal dress, severe at the throat and severe at the wrist. Her hair, when one could bear to look directly at it, was the color of old pewter. Her hands were empty. She had, it goes without saying, no shadow. She was watching Petunia. She was thinking in the very specific way Nemesis thought, about a woman who had once drawn a line down the middle of a sister and walked along one side of it with her face turned, for so long that she had forgotten she had ever done it. She thought about the sister, who was dead. She thought about the sister's son, who was at the stove. She thought about 3,041 mornings. Petunia, she said, in a voice none of the Dursleys could hear, but the kitchen light dimmed by 0.5% and Petunia's hand wavered on the spatula. You are accumulating. The bacon spat. Petunia did not turn. Petunia did not know why she shivered. The skin between her shoulders prickled in the manner of skin that has been considered. The eggs cracked themselves wrong in her fingers. You shall not, Nemesis said, very quietly, make this child smaller today. She did not yet place her mark. She had a rule. She wanted to see if Petunia, given a clear morning, would do it on her own. Petunia did it on her own. At 6:51 a.m. Harry was carrying plates to the table. He had 2 stacked on his left forearm, 2 in his right hand, 1 balanced on the back of his right wrist, a trick he had developed because plates were rationed by Petunia in the order of color, and one needed both hands free for the saucers. He passed her on her way to the toaster. She caught him with her hip, not by accident, but in the practiced way one catches a child with a hip, the hip serving as both correction and signal. Watch yourself, she said, light and crisp. Honestly. Skinny like a stalk and clumsy like a gosling. Sorry, Aunt Petunia, and mind the floor. Yes, Aunt Petunia. Honestly, Lily was at least graceful. You well. She looked at him briefly, the way one looks at a knot in a piece of pine. You take after the other one. It was not the worst thing she had ever said to him. It was, in fact, a fairly mid-tier sample of her morning catalog. It was light enough that Harry did not flinch. He had learned, in the careful way a small accountant learns the difference between mild and mortal entries, where to place this one. He placed it. He moved on to the saucers. Nemesis, by the door, did not move. She did not blink. She did not, by any visible action, react. She simply, in the ledger of which only she was the keeper, drew a small line beneath the day so far. Below it she wrote a single sum. Then she added Vernon's contribution, which arrived 3 minutes later in the form of a newspaper rolled into a small baton. Boy. Vernon did not need a word for the boy. He had developed over 11 years an entire dialect of the word. Yes, Uncle Vernon. Where's my coffee? Brewing. Where's my paper? On the table. Don't sass. I'm not, and don't make me say it twice, boy, or I'll see that you regret it. Yes, Uncle Vernon. This was not the worst thing Vernon had ever said. It was, in fact, a fairly mid-tier sample. Harry placed it. He moved on. Nemesis allowed the morning to play itself out. She permitted Petunia to do 4 more entries, 3 small, 1 larger, and Vernon to do 6. She permitted Dudley to do 2, which were inherited from Vernon and therefore charged twice. By 8:30 she had a clean column, dated totaled, and she carried it with her, invisibly, to the front step. The mail came. The first letter was addressed in green ink in handwriting Petunia recognized at the wrist before she was conscious of recognizing it. Petunia went very still. Vernon behind her said, "What's that?" Petunia said nothing. Harry behind both of them said, "Is that for me?" "Get inside," Petunia said. "Why is get inside?" Petunia's voice, when it climbed, did not climb the way Vernon's climbed. Vernon climbed the way an angry man climbs. Petunia climbed the way a woman who has, for a long time, been holding the lid on a pot. Harry knew the difference. He stepped back. He went in. He stood in the hall. He listened. It was a long listen. By that night the doors of number 4 were boarded against owls. Vernon had nailed an entire stack of magazines across the letter slot, an act of carpentry so unproductive that it would later, when Nemesis came to total it, count as a cruelty against Vernon's own future ability to receive mail. The fireplace had been blocked with the body of a sofa cushion. The radio had been unplugged. The road was watched. The boy was again in his cupboard. The boy was again awake. Far above the chimney of number 4, on a draft of warm summer air, an owl arrived. It dropped a letter into the chimney. The letter could not get past the cushion. It thumped against the cushion and lay on the hearth. Vernon in the living room made a noise that was almost human. A second owl arrived. A third. By the dozen, the hundred, the air was thick with feathers. The Dursleys' wallpaper began to thump. The sky over Privet Drive bristled. Nemesis, on the front step, watched. She was not yet smiling because she did not smile, but the angle of her head shifted. She was, in the fullness of her composure, amused. When the lighthouse on the rock outside Penzance heaved its yellow eye through the dawn, and when a knock so emphatic that it took the door off its hinges came down through the cliffside, Nemesis was no longer on Privet Drive. She had by then walked through walls and weathered to a small shack on a sea rock. She was watching a giant break the door. The giant said, "Now, where's our Harry?" Nemesis nodded once to herself in approval, not of the door, but of the man. Hagrid was not subtle. Hagrid had not been subtle even before Hogwarts had stopped trying. He filled the doorway. He filled, more or less, the sea rock. He was carrying a parcel that turned out to be Harry's birthday cake. He lit a fire with a pink umbrella that should not have been able to light a fire. He set down the cake. He looked at Vernon, who was holding a shotgun, and said, "I'd not." Vernon did not put down the shotgun. Vernon had taken to the shotgun with the deeply unwise enthusiasm of a man who had spent a sleepless night being told, by his wife, that his world had been smaller than he believed. He squared his shoulders. He inflated his mustache. He pointed the shotgun briefly at Hagrid's chest, and said in the loudest version of the morning he had attempted, "I demand that you leave this outrage at once, or so help me." The shotgun did not fire. It did, as Hagrid placed 2 fingers to the barrel and folded the muzzle into a knot, become a small, compact piece of sculpture that resembled, more than anything, a very tense pretzel. "Mr. Dursley," Hagrid said very mildly, "you don't want to do that." You really don't, sir." Vernon said nothing for a long second. The pretzel hung in his hand. His mustache, in a series of small concessions, deflated. The shotgun stock, which was where the actual mass of it was, suddenly felt very heavy. He sat down. He sat down, in fact, on the edge of the sofa cushion he had earlier rammed into the fireplace. He did not get up. This was, in the strict sense of the morning's accounting, a Vernon against Hagrid transaction. It was not, by Nemesis's standards, a cruelty against Harry. It was instead a cruelty against Hagrid. Hagrid did not need her favor. Hagrid had been in a professional skirmish with Vernon for under 30 seconds and had emerged with a pretzel. Even so, Nemesis logged the moment. She logged it as a piece of cosmic foreshadowing, the way a courthouse might log a parking meter expired entirely outside the case at hand. Irrelevant but noted. Right then, Hagrid said, "Cake's gettin' cold. Harry, there y'are. Happy birthday." Harry, in the corner of the shack, took a step forward. He took the cake. He held it the way one holds an object whose existence is so foreign that any wrong handling might cause it to ascend. "Happy birthday, Harry," Hagrid said again, more softly. Harry said nothing for a moment. He said, when he said anything, "Thank you." It was not the moment in which Nemesis placed her mark. It was the moment in which Nemesis decided that she would. Nemesis was not, by temperament, an interventionist. She had for 11 years refrained. What changed her mind has been argued among the few who keep the small theology of vengeance, and they have not agreed. Some say it was the cake. Some say it was the moment in the shack when Hagrid laughed. Some say it was the asymmetry, perfect, mathematical, of a child made smaller every day so two adults could feel larger. The favored explanation, among those who are paid to know, is that no single thing changed her mind. She had been keeping a column of arithmetic for 11 years, and at last the arithmetic added. She walked that night while a giant slept on a sofa whose springs would not recover, and a boy slept on Hagrid's coat with his mouth slightly open, into the cupboard under the stairs at number 4 Privet Drive, which was, after a decade, empty. She stood inside it. She placed her hand on the wall. She stood motionless while the wallpaper agreed to her being there. She said in a voice the wood and the plaster and the dust could hear, "This is mine. From this hour, the child who sleeps here is mine." The cupboard did not protest. The cupboard, in the way of cupboards that have held a child too long, was relieved. She left. She did not, that night, cross the ocean on a wind. She did not need to. She found Harry exactly where he was. There are no places that are not in the world, and Nemesis has the run of the world. She sat on the boards of the floor of Hagrid's shack, where Harry had laid down with a coat over him, and she watched him sleep. She did not place her mark while he slept. She had a courtesy. She waited until he stirred at 3:20 in the morning, which is the hour at which most boys who have been beaten under stairs for a long time will stir, briefly, to confirm that they are still alone. He opened his eyes. He saw her. He should not have been able to. There are very few mortals who can see Nemesis directly. She had that night, in the small kindness she allowed herself for occasions of this kind, made it possible. He did not move. She did not blink. "Harry Potter," she said. It was not a question. It was a declaration. He licked his lips. He had no spit. He found his voice anyway because he had been finding his voice for a long time in adverse conditions. "Yes," he said, "you do not know me. Number, you do not need to. You will know me in time, or you will not, as you choose. What you must hear from me tonight is short. Will you listen?" It was not a question. It was a decision he was being permitted to confirm. He nodded. 11 years, she said. "The people who have raised you have wronged you, and they have wronged you in ways neither severe enough nor visible enough that anyone with the means to intervene would do so. They have made you smaller so they could feel larger. They have done this in idiom. Each idiom is on a list. I have kept the list." "All right," he said. His voice was very small. He was not afraid. He was, in some careful and economical way, attentive. "Tonight," she said, "I am going to place a mark on you. The mark cannot be seen. You will not feel it. You will not be able to use it. It will work instead on its own." "What does it do?" "It returns," she said. "Every cruelty done to you in idiom, exactly in idiom, at threefold weight. It is patient. It is precise. It is impartial. You cannot wield it, child. You cannot direct it. It does not care if you forgive. It does not care if you forget. It does not care if I rescind it. I cannot rescind it. The world will simply, from this hour, render to your enemies what your enemies render to you." She paused. She had for 11 years been a column. Now she was, briefly, a sentence. "Do you understand?" He thought about it. He was a careful boy. He was, after 11 years, careful in the way a child made smaller every day learns to be careful. He thought about the morning. He thought about the bacon. He thought about Petunia's hip. He thought about Vernon's voice and the dialect of the word boy and the cushion in the fireplace. He thought about Dudley. He said, "What about me? You cannot abuse it," she said. "It is not a weapon you hold. It is a debt the world owes you that I have made the world pay. You can do as you choose. You can be cruel. You can be kind. You can spend the next 50 years being whatever it is you decide to be. The mark does not care what you decide. It only cares about what is done to you. And to them, to Aunt Petunia, to Uncle Vernon, to—" "Yes." He was quiet. He said very carefully, "Will it hurt them?" It will, she said, be exactly equivalent to what they have done, threefold. He thought about it. He thought about it for a long time. He was not wicked. He was, after 11 years, capable of being merciful. He was also capable, after 11 years, of arithmetic. He said finally in the voice of a child taking a very long breath, "Okay." She nodded. She stood. She walked to him. She placed her hand briefly on the top of his head, where Petunia, on the morning of his 8th birthday, had once placed her own and then, very deliberately, withdrawn it. She did not say anything more. She left. In the small shack on the rock, Harry lay still for a long minute. He did not feel different. He did not feel marked. He did not feel anything other than what he had felt for 11 years, which was a loose tightness in his chest he had taken in default to be the shape of his own ribs. He turned over. He slept. He did not dream. In the morning, Hagrid took Harry into Diagon Alley and the world began. Nemesis did not follow them into the alley. She had no need. Her mark was not a presence. It was an absence. An absence, suddenly, of one specific kind of luck for one specific category of person. She returned to Privet Drive instead, where Petunia was already at the stove, where Vernon was already at the paper, where Dudley was already at the television. The kitchen, without Harry in it, was orderly the way an unswept floor is orderly. You had only to look at the corners. Nemesis stood in the corner. She waited. She did not have to wait long. Vernon had, on the previous Friday, performed a particular kind of cruelty at Grunnings. The cruelty had a name in the office, and the name was Reggie. Reggie was a small man with a large family. Reggie had brought, that Friday, a paper to Vernon's desk and had asked, in the deferential way one asks Vernon Dursley anything, for a signature and a small explanation. Vernon had signed. Vernon had not explained. Vernon had instead, in front of 3 colleagues, told Reggie that he was the kind of man one looked at with one's eyes half shut so as not to be reminded that the company employed such men. The colleagues had laughed. Reggie had laughed too, because the alternative was worse. He had taken his paper. He had gone back to his desk. He had cried in the staff toilet for 15 minutes between 2 and 2:15, which were the minutes Reggie could afford. This was on Vernon's tab. Reggie's children were not on Vernon's tab. They had nothing to do with anything. The world did not care about their having nothing to do with anything. The world cared about the tab. Tuesday morning at Grunnings, at 10:15, Vernon entered a board meeting in which a contract he had, 6 weeks ago, fudged a number on was up for review. Vernon had fudged the number with the confidence of a man who had been fudging numbers undetected for 11 years. The number was small. The contract was for a Birmingham firm. The number was £4,100. Vernon had pocketed 700, and it had paid, exactly, for the new conservatory windows in his living room, of which Petunia was very proud. The Birmingham firm had hired, in the last 10 days, a junior auditor. The junior auditor had been told, on the previous Friday, by an uncle, that the boy Reggie at Grunnings was a decent man whose work was being pulled apart in public by a fat son of a so-and-so for whom the auditor's uncle had personal contempt. The auditor's uncle had not asked the auditor to do anything in particular. The auditor's uncle had simply mentioned that Reggie's work passed across Vernon's desk on its way to the Birmingham firm. The junior auditor went looking. The junior auditor found Vernon's number. At 10:23 on Tuesday, in the Grunnings boardroom in front of 7 men, 2 of whom had laughed on the previous Friday at Reggie, the junior auditor, by phone on speaker, recited the discrepancy of £4,100, the location of the discrepancy, the date of the discrepancy, and the signature on the discrepancy. The signature had been Vernon's. Vernon's face went a color that was not in the spectrum of available human colors. The 2 colleagues did not laugh. The other 5 did not look at him. The Birmingham firm on the speaker said, "Mr. Dursley," in the polite voice of a man with a tape running. Vernon said nothing for a long second. Then, because he had been the kind of man who told other men they were the kind of men one looked at with one's eyes half shut, he said, in a voice he did not recognize, "Could we have the room a moment?" The room had the moment. The door closed. Vernon in the boardroom sat very still. His mustache, in a series of small concessions, deflated. He was the kind of man now that one looked at with one's eyes half shut. The conservatory windows in his living room had cost him, in the world's accounting, considerably more than £700. The threefold of 4,100 is 12,300. He was made to refund it. He was, by an additional cosmic spite Nemesis had not strictly arranged, but would not strictly disclaim, given a cut to his Christmas bonus. He was, in addition, the subject in a thoroughly unrelated coincidence of 2 drill ink, office gossip strings that ran for the rest of the calendar year. It was, by Petunia's standards, a bad Tuesday. Vernon drove home that afternoon with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the middle distance, and a small, precise red blur sitting on his sternum that he had not been able to argue out of his sternum since the speakerphone. He had spent the morning thinking about ways the morning could be reframed. He had 10 reframings ready. He had drafted them in the toilet stall between 11:30 and noon. By 2:30, he had used 3 of them on the pool car receptionist and had watched, with the slow horror of a man who is dressed in the dark, each one fall flat in the fluorescent kindness of the receptionist's face. The receptionist had not laughed. The receptionist had also not nodded. The receptionist had simply produced his keys and said, "Drive safe, Mr. Dursley," in the tone reserved for drivers who, by long observation, did not. He had taken his keys. He had driven. He was driving now in the slow afternoon traffic on the Hanger Lane, and he was thinking the only sustained thought that Vernon Dursley had ever in his life fully completed, that someone, somewhere, had done this to him. He could not have said who. He had a list of candidates that, by Wednesday, would settle on a man at Drill Inc., named Pearson. Pearson, by Friday, would have a small, peculiar humiliation of his own. Vernon's tab against Pearson, accumulated over the previous 8 months, did not need a separate explanation. The mark was patient. The mark could afford to lay an extra column. By the time he turned into Privet Drive, his color had partially returned to him, and he had reframed the morning, in his own private prosody, into a thing that had been done to him by jealous men. It was the only kind of thing, for Vernon, that could be done. He had never in a long life been done to by his own arithmetic. The arithmetic in the seat beside him said nothing. Petunia's bad Tuesday began at 10:37, when Mrs. Polifax from number 6 knocked on her door for tea and brought, by way of greeting, a small confidence. She had heard, she said, with her hand to her mouth in the practiced manner of a woman delivering a poisoned biscuit, that Petunia's car had been seen at the off-license on Monday afternoon, twice. Petunia's car had not been at the off-license on Monday afternoon, twice. Petunia's car had been at the off-license on Monday afternoon once, and Petunia had bought, with a slight air of pretense, a single bottle of cooking sherry, which she had had no immediate intention of cooking with. Twice, Petunia said. Twice, said Mrs. Polifax. That can't. Of course it can't, Mrs. Polifax said smoothly. Of course it can't, dear. I'm only telling you what I heard. I thought you want to know. Petunia thought, as she made tea with hands she did not entirely trust, about Mrs. Polifax's husband. Mrs. Polifax's husband had, on a previous occasion, been described by Petunia at this very table as a man whose suits hung on him the way a pillowcase hangs on a chair. It had been a casual remark. It had been delivered at the same low, conversational pitch with which Mrs. Polifax was now delivering off-license sightings. The pitch was the thing. The pitch was the language Petunia and Mrs. Polifax both spoke, and you did not, in this language, get to be cruel without being, eventually, pitched. Petunia put down the tea things. Petunia said, 2 visits, Mrs. Polifax sipped. Twice. What did they say? Oh, nothing of substance, dear. You know how people are. You know, of course, it wasn't anyone you'd believe. It would, at 1:13 that afternoon, be Mrs. Polifax, very mildly, to Mrs. Reed at number 8, by the hedge, between the gladioli. It would, at 4:15, be Mrs. Reed at number 8 to Mrs. Henson on the bus. It would, at 6:40, be Mrs. Henson to her sister on the phone. It would, by the end of the week, be a full and slightly elaborated thing, which Petunia would have to spend 2 months unwinding, and which would, in the unwinding, be added to. Petunia would lose 3 friends she did not entirely value and 1 she had liked, and the threefold of 1 cooking sherry bottle's worth of public humiliation would land, with the precision of a darning needle, in her social geography. She did not see it for what it was. She would not, for some time, see anything for what it was. She did, that afternoon, after Mrs. Polifax left, sit at her kitchen table for 10 minutes with her hands folded. Nemesis, in the corner, did not move. Nemesis watched her. The kitchen, briefly, was very quiet. At Smeltings, which was a place Dudley would not arrive at for another month, the hat fittings happened that summer in a small, crowded room above the school office. There were 16 incoming boys at the fitting Dudley attended. 3 of them were, by accident or by an arrangement Dudley would never quite be able to articulate, exactly Dudley's size. 3 of them had heard, by the same arrangement, that Dudley had an arm. 3 of them were eldest sons of fathers who had themselves been hated at Smeltings for being exactly 1 head taller than the average and twice as wide. Dudley, on the morning of the fittings, was prepared to enjoy himself. Dudley was, by lunch, a boy whose Smeltings cap had been thrown into a tree, whose Smeltings stick had been bent, who had been in front of 2 passing teachers, called by a name he had himself. on the 5th of June at 3:15 in the afternoon, called Harry, and whose mother, when she arrived to collect him, would find him sitting at the steps of the school office holding a cap with a leaf in it, and looking at the asphalt the way one looks at a place where one's interior life has gone. Petunia, who had had a long Tuesday already, said nothing for a long second. Then she said, very crisply, "Get in the car." Dudley got in the car. He did not, by the standards of the rest of his summer, recover. Nemesis, in the front seat of Petunia's car, was not visible. The seat had been, in any case, occupied by Petunia's handbag. Nemesis, in the front seat that was not the front seat, looked at Petunia. Petunia did not look back. Petunia, by this stage of the day, was well past looking. Petunia drove the car. "I want," Petunia said to Dudley in the back, "to know which boys." Dudley did not, in the form of words, know. "3 of them," Dudley said. "3 of them, Mum." "Which 3? They were what? They were just like," it died in his throat. Petunia did not pursue. Petunia would, by the time of the conservatory, have decided Dudley was being singled out for being a leader, and would deploy this as the new column of her social conversation. Mrs. Polifax would, eventually, be forgiven, because her cousin's son was at Smeltings and might do something. Petunia did not connect the 2 columns of her day. Petunia did not connect anything that day. The connections were, even so, being made calmly, by a woman in the seat beside her, who could be neither asked nor thanked. Hagrid took Harry to Diagon Alley by the tube and on foot. The tube was loud. The leaky cauldron was small. The brick wall at the back of the courtyard was, as Harry would note later, the first piece of magic he had been invited to participate in on the basis that he was supposed to participate in it. Hagrid tapped the bricks. The bricks moved. The alley unfolded. Harry stood in it for a moment. He stood in it, more accurately, for a moment longer than other boys would have. He was, by long training, careful with new rooms. He had a habit of cataloging exits before he entered them. He performed the catalog. He found, too, the brick wall behind him, and a second arch at the far end with a goblin gate above it. He registered the goblin gate. He registered the gold. He registered the smell of melted butter and cauldron iron. He stepped in. A small man in a green cloak brushed past him and pressed into Harry's palm a brown paper-wrapped parcel. The man did not stop. The man kept walking. The man, this would be observed later by no one in particular, was on his way somewhere very specific. The way Hermes is always on his way somewhere very specific, and the somewhere specific that morning was a window above a chocolatier in Nocturne Alley, where he was due to deliver a different package to a different boy who had nothing to do with this story, and would never know the courier's name. Harry stood in the alley with a parcel in his hand. Parcel was not heavy. The parcel rustled. "Oi," said Hagrid 10 feet ahead. "Don lose me, Harry. I didn't was that there. I don't know. Lemme see." Hagrid, who was always going to peer into a parcel and never going to disrespect a parcel, peered without disrespecting. Inside the parcel was a small folded note. Inside the small folded note was a single line of handwriting in green ink that was not Petunia's but had the same slant. The line said, "Pay the goblins." "Don't argue, tell no one. What's it say?" said Hagrid. "Nothing," Harry said. He had had the schooling for this. His face did not move. He folded the note. He folded the note again. He put it in his pocket. "HMPH," said Hagrid. "Well, Diagon Alley, mind your pocket." They went. The goblins that morning were curt. The goblins were always curt. The goblins, when Harry asked, in the small Hagrid-coached hesitation of a boy who has been asked to carry an instruction, whether anything had been deposited under his name in the past 48 hours, considered him. The goblin who considered him had a long list. The goblin scrolled it, in the careful goblin way Harry would later learn was actually a polite courtesy. The goblin said, eventually, "Yes." A small box was produced. The small box contained 11 galleons in a velvet pouch with no return address. Harry, in the privacy of the goblin counter, swallowed once. He did not know the value of the coins. He did not know in any practical sense what 11 of them were for. 11 was a number he understood. It was his age. It was the number of birthdays he had been forgotten on. He took the pouch. He thanked the goblin. He pocketed the pouch. In Ollivander's, an hour later, the wand chose him, and a small bell rang in a private dimension to which Ollivander did not personally have a key. Ollivander said very quietly, "The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter, but I confess today I think the wand was directed." "Sorry," Harry said. "Nothing," said Ollivander, who had been in the wand business long enough to know an interesting client when he met one and to know, more specifically, when not to ask. "Nothing at all. 11 galleons, Mr. Potter. The pouch covered it." Hagrid did not see the pouch. Hagrid did not see because he was outside the shop chatting to a flock of owls. Harry paid in private. Harry left in the company of a man who was a foot taller than the doorframe. Harry in the alley looked once at his pocket and then did not look again. He had in his pocket 11 galleons and a folded paper note and a wand whose handle was 11 inches and whose core was the feather of a phoenix that had also produced one other wand 11 years ago and had then taken 11 minutes longer to molt the next morning than any other phoenix on record. It is a rule of pantheons that they like 11s. Harry, who was 11, did not yet know it. In Madame Malkin's, while a tape measure measured itself across him with the unsupervised zeal of a tape measure that had been doing this longer than he had been alive, Harry was made to stand on a stool next to a pale boy his age, whose fitting had been somewhere between vain and complete. The pale boy looked at him sidelong and said, "Hogwarts, you?" "Yes, my father's next door looking at wands, mother's up the street looking at books." The pale boy made the distinction sound like a property line. "I'm going to be in Slytherin, all my family's been. Imagine being in Hufflepuff, I think I'd leave." Said Harry. "What's your name?" Harry told him. The pale boy went very still. The pale boy went, in a manner Harry had seen before in Aunt Petunia at the precise quarter-second of a small social discovery, very still in the eyes. Then the pale boy moved his face into a posture that was, Harry suspected, the rough draft of a posture he had been practicing for occasions exactly like this one. "Potter. Yes, yes. Well," said the pale boy with the air of a man producing the second draft of a posture he had also practiced. "Well, we must in due course be friends. A boy of your standing I'm sure your parents would have wanted. My parents are dead, of course." The tape measure in the silence that followed hummed across his collar in 2 efficient passes and stopped. Madame Malkin clipped her thread. The pale boy got down from his stool. He nodded briefly in the way a child nods when an entire dynastic conversation has not gone as he had drafted it. He walked past Harry without quite looking at him. He did not say goodbye. Out on the pavement, Hagrid handed Harry an ice cream he had not asked for and did not in any practical sense know how to refuse. "Yeah, right there," Hagrid said, who had a private library of cues for boys who had had bad weeks. "Made a friend, did ya? Number, ah." Hagrid looked at the door of the shop. He looked at the back of the pale boy, retreating up the street. He looked at Harry. He pulled a small, surprisingly clean handkerchief from a pocket the size of a grocery sack and offered it. Harry did not need it. He took it anyway because Hagrid had given it to him and that was enough. He folded it into his pocket next to the note that said "Pay the goblins. Don't argue. Tell no one." The 2 scraps lay against each other in the same pocket without crowding. "'S all right," Hagrid said. "Some folks, they're born to a thing and they ain't ever met the thing. The thing'll meet 'em in time. Don't you worry." "I'm not worried," Harry said, who was in a careful way telling the truth. That night the giant slept on his sofa. The boy slept on his coat. The boy did not dream. The boy in his sleep smiled, not a wide smile, not the smile of a happy child, but the smile of a boy who has, in the order of his accounting, just drawn a small line beneath the day. In a sky the boy could not see, on a balcony with no rail, Apollo took a sip from a cup and said to no one in particular, in a verse that scanned in a pattern Hermes would later identify as a bad limerick, "Marked is the child by the Lady of Just, read is the ledger is dust, reap as ye sowed, O ye pertinent few, the world is now keeping a tab upon you." "Will you stop?" said Hermes, who had just come back from an alley in London. "Will you stop with the verse? It scans, it does not scan. It scans by my own private prosody. That is not a thing. Anything I do," said Apollo, "is a thing by definition. I am the god of, she's done it, hasn't she?" said Hades from a chaise that had no business being on a balcony with no rail. "She's marked him." "She has," said Hermes. "He took a parcel from me without flinching. He's a good kid. He's going to be insufferable in about 3 years. He's going to be magnificent," said Apollo. "He's going to be alive," said Hades. The 4th chair, which had not been occupied briefly for the duration of an exhalation, was, Themis sat in it. She did not stay. She said, "It is balanced." It was time, then she stood, then she was gone. "He'll need help," said Hades after a while, who had been thinking and was, in the way Hades was thinking, a long way from glib. "He won't need much," said Hermes. "He'll need some." The kind," said Hades. "Apollo, are you offering verse or are you offering attention?" "I am offering," said Apollo, "verse as attention. That is not a thing. Anything I do is a thing, by definition." Hermes looked at Hades. Hades looked at Hermes. They had been in this conversation for a long time, in the way the gods were always in their conversations for a long time, and the conclusions did not need to be reached out loud anymore. Hermes raised an eyebrow. Hades raised very slightly the corner of his mouth. They drank. Below them, at a distance in a darker chair in a colder room, a 5th figure did not look up. She did not need to. She had her ledger. She had her column. She had a name at the top of a new page, a name that at this hour only she was reading. Voldemort. She drew beneath it a small line. She began to add. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Sorting and other small lessons. The trouble with Platform 9 3/4 was that you had to walk into a wall. The other trouble was that nobody had told Harry, in any direct way, that you had to walk into the wall. The ticket said Platform 9 3/4 in green ink. The brass-faced clock at King's Cross said September the 1st, 10:46 in no ink at all. The wall said nothing. Walls rarely did. He pushed his trolley along the line of pillars between platforms 9 and 10, looking in the careful way a small accountant looks for a misplaced entry, for any indication that one of the pillars was not, in the ordinary sense of the word, a pillar. A round-faced woman with a pram trundled past, towing a string of red-haired children, and said, in a carrying voice, "Now, Percy, you first. Honestly, every year. Pack of muggles all over the place again." Harry, who had until that morning held the working theory that the platform was a phrase with a literal floor under it, slowed down. The eldest red-haired child set himself at one of the pillars, took a brisk run, and disappeared. Harry said, "Excuse me." "Yes, dear. How do you? First time, is it?" "Yes." The woman smiled at him in the way of a mother who had seen, by long practice, the precise expression of a child who has not been told the literal mechanics of a thing. "Just walk straight at the wall between platforms 9 and 10. Don't stop and don't be scared. Best to do it at a bit of a run if you're nervous." She paused. "And dear, if you don't mind me saying, you've got the look of someone we've all heard of, but I won't say what for, and I'm sure you'd rather I didn't. Off with you. Ron, you're next." He took the run. He took it because it was not the worst suggestion he had taken all summer. The wall went past him on either side. He came out the other side onto a platform with a scarlet engine on it. The engine breathed steam. The platform was full of trunks. Owls in cages were complaining politely. Children in robes were calling other children in robes, and other children's parents were calling them all back. He looked, briefly, at the engine. He had in his pocket 11 galleons less the cost of school robes and an old paperback potion text he had bought on a whim in the alley, plus a folded paper note that said "Pay the goblins. Don't argue. Tell no one." Plus a small black coin he had received the previous Tuesday by post that bore on its face an inscription in a language he could not read, and on the reverse the simple word "interested." He did not yet know what to make of the coin. He had not asked. He kept it. He found a trunk porter, who turned out to be one of the red-haired children, and who introduced himself in passing as Ron. "Bloody hell," said Ron, who was Harry's age and who was, by a margin of an inch, taller. "You really lift this stuff yourself. You'll do your back." "Sorry. No, here, give it." Ron took the other end. They put the trunk on. Ron's mother, whom Ron had not yet introduced and would in due course turn out to be named Molly, called from the platform, "Ron, dear, do you have your sandwich tin?" "Yes, Mum." "Did you say goodbye to?" "Yes, Mum." "Don't dawdle, Ronald, your father's got to." "Yes, Mum." Harry got into the carriage with him. The compartment was empty. The compartment smelled like the inside of a varnished pencil case. They put their trunks up on the rack. They sat down on opposite benches. The train, with the small precision of a train that has been doing this for 120 years, began to move. "So," said Ron after a while. "So," said Harry. "Hooray you then. You don't act like, I mean, you're new, aren't you? Like really new." Harry Potter." Ron stared at him for a second. Ron then, in the way of a boy who has been raised by a sensible woman and 4 older brothers, and has been told more than once that one does not gawp, looked, briefly, at the curtains. "Right," he said. "Right," said Harry. "Right, well." Ron sat back. He put his hands in his pockets. He took them out. He put them back. Do you remember it? You know who I mean. Number, probably for the best. Probably. My brothers say, oh nothing, just they say things." "Right." The train, which had taken 4 minutes to clear the suburbs and was now going through countryside Harry did not recognize, settled into a long flat hum. A trolley arrived with sweets. Harry, who had 11 galleons and a folded paper note to spend on a journey, bought, in the manner of a boy who had never, in 11 years, been permitted to buy more than one sweet at a time, and was therefore, on principle, not buying the same sweet twice, the entire trolley. They ate chocolate frogs. They ate Bertie bought S. Ron got a sprout. Ron pulled a face that, by Harry's measurement, was the precise face Aunt Petunia had pulled the morning he had spilled tea on her newspaper. "Bloody hell, sprouts," said Ron. "Try the tangerine. Trust the orange ones, mate. Always trust the orange ones." Halfway through Berkshire the door opened. Harry, who had been telling Ron the unedited version of his summer in the manner of a boy who had not, in any meaningful way, told anybody anything in a long time, and was therefore being very careful with the verbs, looked up. A girl with a great deal of hair and a great deal of frontage of teeth said, "Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one." She paused. She looked at them. She had the air of a girl who, having read 7 full textbooks and a pamphlet and a half of supplementary material, was now arriving at the practical portion. "I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. Are you?" Oh, her eyes had performed the recognition that, since the morning, had been performed by every person on the train who was old enough to read a paper. "You're Harry Potter. I read about you. You're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. "Am I?" said Harry. "Goodness, didn't you know? I'd have found out everything I could if it were me." She came in. She sat down. She looked at the trolley wreckage. She looked at Ron. She said with the brisk, level tone of a girl who had also been told by her mother not to gawp, "You've got dirt on your nose, did you know, just there." Ron tried to look at his nose. "Anyway," said Hermione, "I think we should be in our robes by now. We'll be there soon. I'll leave you to it." She went. "Bloody hell," said Ron. "She's all right. She's something, that's what she is." The compartment door opened a second time 20 minutes later. The opening was different. The first opening had been a girl looking for a toad. The second opening was 3 boys looking, in the careful way 3 boys look, for an audience. The boy in the middle was pale, with hair the color of old butter, and a posture Harry had seen in a tape measure. The boys on either side of him were larger and, by Harry's quick assessment, were the kind of boys who had been hired more than chosen. "Is it true?" said the pale boy. "All down the train they're saying Harry Potter's in this compartment." "Yes." The pale boy took a breath that was, Harry's quick read indicated, the third draft of a posture. "Well, we meet again. Draco Malfoy. I remember. You'll find some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to make friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." He gave Ron, as an exhibit, the sort of look one gives a stack of overdue invoices. "Some of us, well, I won't say. The Weasleys, of course, are well known. Red hair, freckles, more children than they can afford. Everyone's seen them at the platform. Mudblood Granger, even, I'd be careful, my father always says." The compartment, in the moment Draco said the word Mudblood, did not change in any manner Harry could see. It did not, by any external evidence, change at all. It changed. In a private dimension which Harry did not have the keys to, a small line was drawn beneath an entry. Below the line, an even smaller hand wrote the precise idiom of the wrong. "A young man has insulted a girl's parentage in front of 2 boys he intends to impress." In the careful column under that line, which Harry was not the keeper of, a sum was added. Ron, who had in Berkshire been Harry's friend for 90 minutes and had been Hermione's not-quite friend for 20 half-rows. "You take that back. I'll take what I like back. Take it back. Or what?" "Or," said Ron, who had not yet been at Hogwarts long enough to know the difference between lifting a wand and lifting a fist, lifted a fist. Crabbe and Goyle, on either side of Draco, lifted theirs. Harry, who had 11 years of practice in the careful art of not getting hit, said nothing at all. He stood up. He did not put up a fist. He looked at Draco with the expression he had, the previous Tuesday, used on a man who had tried to overcharge him at Madame Malkin's and which had very effectively reduced the bill. "Out," he said. "What? Out of the compartment, Malfoy. And who's going to out?" It was not the word, it was the rest. It was the shape of his face, which Harry had developed in 11 years of small adverse conditions, and was, in essence, the shape of a face that had nothing left to be afraid of. Draco looked at him for a second. Crabbe looked at Goyle. Goyle looked at Crabbe. The small hostile arithmetic of 3 boys against 1 boy ran into the slightly larger arithmetic of 2 boys plus a target who had, with no visible apparatus, taken the column from them. They left. They did not slam the door. They were too well dressed in their hostility to slam. Ron sat down, breathing as though the train had been the one to take a punch. "Bloody Harry, bloody, what just, he'll have a bad week," said Harry, because it was the first thing that had come to him to say, and because he did not, in any practical sense, know why he had said it. He did not, in any practical sense, know that it was true. 3 days later, in the Slytherin common room, an old portrait that Draco's mother had personally moved into Hogwarts last term. A stiff Renaissance ancestor named Caspar Malfoy, who was in the painted family album more for genealogical record than for sparkling commentary, would, without any particular provocation, wonder aloud, in front of 3 Slytherin first-years and a 4th-year prefect, whether young Draco's grandmother on his father's side had had the dispensation she had been granted by her marriage contract to be referred to as a Malfoy at all. Painted ancestor would refer, by way of evidence, to letters that he had not, by any plausible record, been alive long enough to read. He would do this twice. He would do this a third time at supper. Draco's spring term social geography would, by mid-October, have spent the summer in the bin. In the compartment in Berkshire, none of this had yet happened. Draco was 12 feet down the corridor, in a compartment with 2 boys he had paid in school robes to keep him company. Harry was sitting back down. Ron was staring at him. Hermione, who had been in the corridor at the precise moment the door had opened the second time and who had, by long habit, listened, was pretending to look for the toad. She came in, she sat down, she looked at Harry. She said, with the brisk tone of a girl who had observed something she was not, by long instruction, supposed to acknowledge having observed, "Are you all right?" "Yes." He used a word. "I know. You shouldn't." "I'm fine, Hermione." Yes." She looked at her hands. She, for a second, did not look like a girl with a great deal of teeth and a great deal of hair. She, for that second, looked like a girl. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome. My parents are dentists." Yes, all right, I should go and find Neville's toad." She went. The compartment after she went was quieter than it had been before she had not quite arrived in it. "Mate," Ron said after a while, "you're going to be hell on wheels at this school. Are you all right?" "Yes." "You're quiet." "Right." The countryside outside became hills. The hills became wet. The light became orange. The train, in the small precision of a train that had been doing this for 120 years, slowed. Hogwarts, in the rain, looked like a mountain that had once been a building and had since gone back to being a mountain. Hagrid was on the platform. Hagrid was the same Hagrid Harry had known for a month, only larger in the rain. The first years were taken across the lake in small black boats. The lake, which had no business being navigable in the dark, was navigable. Harry in the boat with Ron and Hermione, and a fourth child whose name was Neville and whose toad was, against odds, accounted for, looked once over the side and saw, in the precise angle of moonlight that the lake permitted, the long pale face of a thing that had been watching and that, on noticing that Harry was looking, briefly blinked and went away. "Did you see?" Hermione started. "That was a yes. You're sure?" "Yes, Hermione." She subsided. The boat went on. The castle came up. Inside, the entrance hall was lit by torches and tall as a barn. A stern witch in tartan met them. She had a Scottish brisk that was, Harry's quick read indicated, the brisk of a teacher who had been a Scottish brisk before she had been a teacher. She introduced herself as Professor McGonagall. She told them in a voice that left no room to be told twice, that they would be sorted into one of 4 houses, that their houses would be like their family at Hogwarts, and that they should look smart. "Look smart," she said. "I will return shortly." She went. 40 first-years stood in the entrance hall more or less smartly. Harry, who had had a great deal of practice in standing smartly, stood. Hermione, behind him, was muttering under her breath at a speed that, his quick ear suggested, was the recital of 3 full sorting songs from prior decades. Ron, beside him, was breathing through his teeth. "What if they make us do magic?" said Ron. "I don't know any. Fred says they make us fight a troll." Fred lies. Fred lies a lot, but he was very specific. Fred lies, Ron. "Right." The doors opened. The great hall was the size of a county. It had 4 long tables of children. It had a 5th high table of staff. It had a starlit ceiling that was not, Hermione had explained twice, actually open to the sky but bewitched to look like it. Professor McGonagall walked them up to the front. There was a stool. On the stool was a hat. The hat opened a seam at its brim and sang, for 2.5 minutes, a song. The song was a nuisance, in Harry's quick read. The song existed, among other reasons, to give him 2.5 minutes to look up at the staff table. He looked. The headmaster was the headmaster he had seen on the cover of his chocolate frog card. The headmaster was looking at him. The headmaster's eyes were very kind. They were also very busy. They had an air, Harry's quick read indicated, of a man who had decided several years ago to be very kind in a manner that left him no time to be other things. To the headmaster's left was the witch in tartan, and to her left was a small pale man whose turban was the size of his head, and who, Harry's quick read indicated, smelled at this distance of garlic. To the headmaster's right, at the far end, was a man whose hair fell in a long black sheet, and whose nose, in profile, was the kind of nose that had never, in any of its years, been used to laugh. The man's eyes were on Harry. The man's eyes did not move. Harry, who had 11 years of practice in a particular kind of being looked at, did not, as such, look back. He logged the look. He filed it. He would, by long habit, return to it later. Then a thing happened that he did not log so much as feel. The pain in his forehead, at the precise place his small lightning-shaped scar lived, lit up. It lit up in the brief inelegance of the simile, the way an old wire lights up when a current goes through a place where the insulation has been worn through. It lit and it died. It died. He felt on the precise heel of the pain dying, a different feeling, which he had, since the morning of the Tuesday after his birthday, been beginning to know. The feeling was a small return. The feeling was the way the column under a sum reads itself, and the sum is paid and the entry closes. He looked at the man with the turban. The man with the turban, Quirrell, the pale fingers of whose right hand Harry could, in the brief inelegance of the perspective, just see, was holding a fork. The fork was halfway between the table and Quirrell's mouth. The fork was, Harry's quick read indicated, full of something. The fork did not move. Quirrell's eyes did move. They moved to Harry. They moved off Harry. They moved to a goblet. The goblet was empty. Quirrell looked at the goblet. Quirrell, in the precise way of a man who had just received a great deal of information he had not asked to receive and would now have to process privately, very carefully put the fork down. The man at the end of the high table, the man whose hair was a long black sheet, whose name Harry had not at this stage learned, also looked at the goblet. He looked at the goblet for 2 seconds. He looked at Harry. He looked at the goblet again. He did not move his face. The hat finished its song. Abbot Hannah. Hannah Abbott was, in due course, Hufflepuff. Susan Bones was Hufflepuff. Terry Boot was Ravenclaw. Lavender Brown was Gryffindor. Millicent Bulstrode was Slytherin. There was a long list. The list scrolled. Harry's name, in the order of its arrival, came up about a third of the way down. By the time it did, Hermione had been Gryffindor for 90 seconds. Ron had been on the bench beside her for 30, and Neville had been Gryffindor for a noisy minute that included a brief unfortunate exit with the hat still on. Potter, Harry. The hall did the small simultaneous intake of breath that the hall had been waiting since September of 1981 to do. Harry walked, he sat, he put on the hat. The hat against his ear in a voice that was very small said, it said again after a moment. It said, difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, not a bad mind either. There's talent, oh my goodness, yes, and a nice thirst to prove yourself now, that's interesting. And it said, well, it said, I see, the lady has paid a visit. The lady is, yes, Harry did not, in any sense his ears could have used, hear what the hat was thinking. Harry only heard, and only because the hat had decided to share the bit it was sharing. A favor, the hat said, in the small private voice it kept for sortings, is a heavy thing, child. I have not in 1,000 years seen one of these. I would have remembered. You are well placed for Slytherin, make no mistake. They would do well by you, and you by them, and you would be safe in the manner that careful boys are sometimes safe. But there is in your head a streak of something straight. The straight streak does not bend toward the snake. Not Slytherin, Harry said quietly against the inside of the hat, who did not, in his quick read, want to be in a house with a boy who had called Hermione what he had called Hermione. No, please, anywhere, not Slytherin. Better be, the hat paused. Harry, in the small private theater of his head, registered the pause as a courtesy. Gryffindor. The hall exploded in the careful manner halls of children explode, which is by uncoordinated cheering. Harry took the hat off. He gave it back. He walked to the long red and gold table. The hat on the stool, in the small inner voice that only the next person to wear it would hear, said very quietly to itself, well, the lady, well. He sat. Ron pounded his back. Hermione, beside Ron, gave him a small, precise smile that was the smile of a girl who, having been recently spoken to in a way she had not asked to be spoken to, was being kind on purpose. The hall around them settled. Dumbledore stood up. Dumbledore said, welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are: nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak, thank you. Plates filled. Harry ate. He ate in the careful way of a boy who had had 11 years of practice in eating not too much and eating very fast, and he was, by the time he got to the 4th roast potato, slow about the 5th. The food was real. The food was hot. The food was not, by any external evidence, going to be taken away. He looked once up at the high table. The man with the long black hair was not eating. He was watching Harry. He had not, since the moment of the goblet, moved his face. He had in his right hand a small piece of bread that he had not, in any of the 4 minutes Harry had been at the table, raised toward his mouth. He set it down. He kept watching. Harry, who in 11 years had made a small, careful study of being watched, decided that he had on the staff table at Hogwarts exactly one new entry in his careful column, and that the entry was named Snape. He did not yet know the name. He filed the man under one sleeve until the name surfaced, which it did at 9:30 when Percy Weasley, who was a prefect, and was therefore obliged to be informative whether or not anybody had asked, told him. That's Snape, head of Slytherin, teaches potions. They say he'd love the defense job, of course, but no one ever holds the defense job long. Don't get on his wrong side, mate, just generally don't. Right, and the man with the turban is Professor Quirrell, defense against the dark arts, stuttering type. Rumor says he had a bad summer. And, right, Percy, thank you. He went up the stairs to the dormitory in due course with a stitch of ginger boys ahead of him and a stitch of ginger boys behind him and Ron beside him. The portrait of the fat lady asked, for its inconvenience, a password. The password was Caput Draconis. The fat lady opened. The common room was a red and gold room that smelled of wood and a little of wet dog and a lot of old smoke. The dormitory was 4 beds. The beds had 4-poster curtains. The bed had Harry's trunk at the foot. He undressed. He got into the bed. He pulled the curtains. He did not, for a long moment, sleep. He lay in the dark with his eyes open and his hands behind his head, and he ran the column of his day. There were a great many entries on the column. There was Ron, and there was Hermione, and there was Draco, and there was Snape, whom he had not yet had a class with and was not, in the columns of his ledger, owed anything by, and who had nevertheless watched him for an entire dinner without raising a piece of bread to his mouth. There was the word the pale boy had used in the corridor. There was the small line drawn beneath the word, in a column of which Harry was no longer, strictly, the only keeper. He turned over. He was, in the moment of turning over, not alone. He should not have been able to know it. He did, in any case. The corridor outside the dormitory door was the corridor it had been. The dormitory was the dormitory it had been. Ron, 2 beds away, was already snoring with the quiet professional snore of a boy who shared a room with 5 brothers. Neville, at the far wall, had taken his toad to bed. The corridor he was now standing in was not the corridor outside the dormitory door. It was longer. The doors on either side of it were doors he did not recognize. The candles in the sconces were older candles in older sconces. The runner under his feet was a runner he had never stepped on before. He had, in the moment of turning over, not gone anywhere. He had, in some other moment than the moment of turning over, gone somewhere, and the going had been so courteous that the moment had not registered until he was here. A woman was at the end of the corridor. She was tall. She was lit for the most part by herself. Her hair was the color of a wet road in a city. Her eyes were, in some small, precise arithmetic he could not have written down, lit from inside. Harry Potter, she said. He had been here before. He had not been here before in any of the geographies of being here he was used to, but he had been at this conversation. He stood very still. He said in the careful way he had been speaking all summer to women in long dresses, "Yes, you do not know me. Number, you will in time, or you will not, as you choose. I am not the one who placed your mark. I am interested. All right." She walked toward him. She did not in the strict sense walk. The runner did. The corridor brought her to him while she did not appear to spend any feet on it. "My name," she said, "is Hecate. All right, I have a great deal of interest, professionally, in young people who have been touched by my sister's order of work. Your kind of mark is not my kind of work. Nemesis is patient, and I am less patient. I am in my own way attentive. May I show you a small thing?" "Yes." She lifted a hand. A candle in a sconce that had not previously been there, guttered. The flame went down to the size of a pip. She did not extinguish it. She let it gutter. She watched it gutter. Then she watched Harry watch it gutter. Try. What? Try, reach, without touching it, without your wand, reach. He thought about it. He thought about it the way a careful boy thinks about an offered ledger entry he has not yet decided to keep. He thought briefly about asking what would happen to him if he did. Then he thought more carefully about the woman who had said she was interested and was watching. He decided on balance that one tries an offered ledger entry once before one decides whether to keep it. He reached. He did not, by any external apparatus, do anything. He reached the way a man reaches with his attention. The candle, with the very small precision of a candle that has been politely asked, brightened. It came back up to a finger of flame. It held there. Hecate watched. She said with a faint thing in her voice that was not, by his quick read, a smile, but was the relative of one, good, you asked, child. You did not take. That is an interesting thing for a boy with your sponsor. Yes, you may keep this if you like. The small candle. I do not give it. I lend it. Should you ever on a hard night need a small light, you will reach. The light will come. Do not abuse it. It is a courtesy. I lend it as a courtesy. Thank you. My pleasure, said Hecate, who had a lot of pleasures in the careful, cool, silken way that Hecate had pleasures, and who, by her own accounting, had not had a new one in a fortnight. Sleep well, Harry Potter. The corridor folded behind her. She did not, in the strict sense, leave. She was simply, after a small interval, no longer where she had been. Harry, in the dormitory, opened his eyes. He had not, by any external evidence, moved. The curtains were closed around him. Ron was still snoring. Neville's toad was still on the pillow. He breathed once in, he breathed once out. He held up his right hand in the dark. He thought in the careful way of a boy who had been told to ask first and take never about a small light. He reached. Above his palm a small light bloomed and held. It was not red, it was not white. It was the color of the inside of a candle when you look at the flame from underneath it and the world is behind it. It lit for a second the side of his face and the back of his hand and the fold of his curtain. He let it go. The dark closed. He turned over. He slept. In a corridor that was nowhere in the castle and nowhere outside it, two women who had not spoken to one another in 100 years met for the duration of a sentence. He asked, said Hecate. He asked, said Nemesis. You will not mind that I do not mind. He is yours to interest. He is mine to keep. Patient as ever. Patient as ever. The corridor closed. The next morning was a Tuesday. The Tuesday began with porridge and ended, a great deal later, with the small, precise architecture of a class that none of them had been to, the rumor of which had preceded it down the 4 staircases between the great hall and the dungeons. He hates Gryffindors, said the older Gryffindor at the Tuesday breakfast table. That's an exaggeration, said Percy Weasley. He hates Gryffindors, said the older Gryffindor again, this time more emphatically. Especially first years, especially. Just don't volunteer anything, don't speak unless he asks, especially you, Potter. Right, said Harry. He had a there's a thing with your dad. Right, look, just keep your head down. Harry kept his head down. He was, in the careful inventory of his 11-year history, well practiced in keeping his head down. He carried the inventory down the staircases with him. He arrived at the potions classroom on time. He sat in the 3rd row. He set his cauldron in front of him. He waited. The door opened the way the door of a potions classroom opens, which is by the man inside the classroom not having opened it, but instead having been on the other side of it and having decided at the precise second to be on this side. Snape stood at the front of the room. He looked at the front of the room the same way he had looked at the high table the night before, only closer. The black sheet of his hair had not, in the intervening 8 hours, moved. The face under it had not, in the intervening 8 hours, decided to laugh. There will be no foolish wand-waving in this class, he said, in the small, precise voice of a man who liked the small, precise voice of a man, or silly incantations. As such, I do not expect many of you to appreciate the subtle science and exact art that is potion-making. Even so, for those select few who possess the predisposition, I can teach you how to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses. I can tell you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even put a stopper in death. He paused. He looked at the room, he looked at Harry. Provided, he added in a voice that was meant to be heard, that you are not a dunderhead. Harry, in the careful inventory of his 11-year history, did not move his face. Potter, Snape said. Yes, sir. Our new celebrity. Tell me, Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? I do not know, sir. Tut, tut. Fame clearly is not everything. Let us try again. Where, Potter, would you look if I asked you to find me a bezoar? I do not know, sir. And what is the difference, Potter, between monkshood and wolfsbane? I do not know that one either, sir. A pause. Snape looked at the room. Pity, he said. Clearly fame is not everything. In the 3rd row on the right side of the room, Hermione's hand had, in the small accelerating manner of Hermione's hand, gone up at the first question and stayed up. She had, by the 3rd question, been bouncing in her seat. He did not call on her. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Harry. For your information, Potter, asphodel, and wormwood make a sleeping potion so powerful it is known as the draught of living death. A bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat and will save you from most poisons. As for monkshood and wolfsbane, they are the same plant, which also goes by the name aconite. Well, why are none of you copying that down? There was a small, brisk shuffle of quills. And 5 points, Snape said, from Gryffindor for your cheek, Potter. Harry did not, by any external evidence, react. In a small private dimension to which Harry did not have a key, a small line was drawn beneath an entry. Below the line, an even smaller hand wrote the precise idiom of the wrong. A teacher has, in front of a class, asked a child a question the child could not have been expected to answer, in order to humiliate the child for having a name the teacher had a long-standing private grievance against. In the careful column under that line, a sum was added. The class after that was the class that the class had been promised it would be. Cauldrons hissed. Snape walked the rows and made remarks. Snape, when he came to the row in which Neville Longbottom had, with the small accelerating manner of Neville's hands when watched, dropped a porcupine quill in the wrong order, removed 5 further points from Gryffindor, and in a voice that was meant to be heard, asked the room, or do we suppose Mr. Longbottom will also be a celebrity? Harry, who had at this point a small, careful column of his own running in his head, registered the 2nd entry. He went with Ron up the 4 flights of dungeon stairs, and across the entrance hall and up the marble staircase to the next class without saying anything. 2 days later, Thursday, at 4:15 in the afternoon, when Snape was alone in the lab preparing a brewing demonstration for a sixth-year class, the door opened. The door did not open the way a door at Hogwarts ordinarily opened. It opened in the precise idiom of an unscheduled visit, smoothly and without warning. A ministry official stepped through, in a robe whose hem had, by the cut of it, not been on a Hogwarts staircase in 15 years. Behind him came Pomona Sprout, who was the head of Hufflepuff and had, in the careful order of Pomona's preferences, no business in a potions lab on a Thursday afternoon. Severus, Pomona said with a brisk, surprised pleasantness that was the brisk, surprised pleasantness of a teacher who had just been ambushed by a ministry inspector and was now being kind about it. This is Mr. Hodgson, from the Department for Education. He is, I gather, doing a brief surprise inspection of our practical laboratories. They've selected you. I'm sorry I had no notice, he insisted. Indeed, said Snape. Indeed, said Mr. Hodgson, who was the kind of small, precise man who had been a junior ministry official long enough to enjoy these visits. I will be brief. A few practical questions for the record. Please, Professor Snape, would you tell me, for the record, what you would get if you added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The lab for a second was quiet. Snape in the lab did not move his face. He answered the question. He answered it correctly, of course. He had been asked the question by his own master at the age of 18, and he had, in the long arithmetic of his life, never since then forgotten the answer. He answered. Mr. Hodgson nodded. And where, Professor, would one look to find a bezoar? In the stomach of a goat, in standard practice. And the difference, Professor, between monkshood and wolfsbane, they are the same plant, also known as aconite. Very good. Mr. Hodgson made a small precise tick on a small precise sheet. Forgive me, Professor. The department finds it useful, every so often, to confirm that even our most senior practitioners can answer the basics in front of a colleague. I trust this has not inconvenienced you. Not at all, said Snape, who had, in the small private theater behind his face, gone very still. Pomona, thank you for your hospitality. Gentlemen, he went. Pomona, after he went, looked at Snape with the careful, sideways look of a woman who had spent 20 years on the same staff as Severus and who had observed, in the small private way Pomona observed everything, that the questions had not been a random sample. Severus, Pomona, please leave. Are you all right? Severus, that was. I said please leave. She left. Snape in the empty lab did not move for 30 seconds. He did not move for 60. He stood at the bench. He looked at the bench. He, in due course, sat down on the stool. He put both his elbows on the bench. He put his fingers into the long black sheet of his hair. He did not, by any external evidence, do anything else for 2 minutes. Then he got up. He took out a clean sheet of parchment. He took out a small precise quill. At the top of the parchment he wrote in his small precise hand the date. Below the date he wrote 1 asphodel and wormwood. He looked at it for a moment. Below that he wrote 2 bezoar. Below that 3 monkshood and wolfsbane. He set down the quill. He stared at the list. The list had 3 items. The 3 items, by any sensible cataloging, were 3 of the most ordinary opening questions in introductory potions. The 3 items, by any other sensible cataloging, were the 3 opening questions he had, 2 days ago in front of a class, asked a Gryffindor first year named Harry Potter. The 3 items had then come back to him, in the order he had asked them, in the mouth of a ministry official who had no plausible reason to ask exactly those 3 questions, in front of Pomona Sprout, with the precise air of a public test he had been required to pass for the record. He looked at the parchment. He looked very slowly around the empty lab. He did not, in the small private theater behind his face, swear. He did not, in the small private theater behind his face, do anything that he would have been embarrassed to be seen doing. He was, by long practice, not the kind of man who would be seen doing anything he would be embarrassed to be seen doing. He picked up the quill. Below the 3rd line he wrote very carefully, "This is not a coincidence." He looked at the line. He drew beneath it a small line. He began to add. The list, by Friday morning, had 4 columns. He did not yet know what the list was for. He kept making it. Chapter 2, End Chapter 3. The tab by the 2nd week of October Snape's list had 31 entries. He had written them with the small, precise hand of a man who had been a competent diarist longer than he had been a great many other things, on a single sheet of parchment that he kept folded inside the inner pocket of his teaching robe, and that he removed twice a day in the small private theater behind his face to update. The columns were now 4. The first was date. The second was ACT. The third was target. The fourth, which had given him, in the privacy of his lab, more trouble than the rest of his life put together, was return. Most rows had no entry yet in column 4. Most days, that was the whole of his arithmetic. He waited for column 4. He had, by long practice, the patience of a brewer. 18 of the rows had column 4 entries. The 18 entries were the small, precise, ironic returns of cruelties he had performed in front of children, in a long career of performing cruelties in front of children that he had never before believed anyone outside his lecture room had registered. He had now registered each of his returns more carefully than he had registered the original. A misplaced ladle, a parent letter complaining of tone. A ministry inspector at 4:15 on a Thursday afternoon. A first-year Hufflepuff who, at the moment Snape had ordered her, in the precise idiom Snape had used on Hermione Granger the previous Wednesday, to put her hand down and stop showing off, had calmly said, "Yes, Professor," and had then at 4:30, when Snape had walked into the staff room, looked at him over a ministry-printed handbook on workplace verbal conduct she had been given to read for prefect training, with the precise face she had made at his order. He had, on the second beat of her glance, looked away. A second-year Slytherin who had, at the precise moment Snape had used the word celebrity on Harry Potter at 8:30 on the morning of October the 10th, in the corridor outside the potions classroom, dropped a glass jar on Snape's left foot. The glass jar had, in the small private theater behind his face, contained the fluid he had been planning to use, that afternoon, to demonstrate a point about pridefulness in young brewers. The point was now to be made on a clean Tuesday with a different jar. There were 18 entries. The 18 entries had a very precise shape. The shape was, an idiom of Snape's wrong, returned to Snape at threefold weight in the same idiom. He had not in 18 entries found one that did not match. The 31st entry on his list, made on the 11th of October at 6:53 in the morning, was a row that had no return entry yet. The row was October 11, 6:48, took 5 points from Gryffindor. Reason, looked at me. Target, Longbottom Neville. Return, he drew very carefully in the empty square where the return would go, a small line. He sat in the dungeon office with the parchment in front of him, and he read it. He had been waiting for a moment in which he could no longer pretend the list did not have a pattern. He had passed that moment, sometime around entry 8. He had been waiting for a moment in which he could no longer pretend the pattern was coincidence. He had passed that moment, sometime around entry 14. He had been waiting, since entry 17, for a moment in which he could put a name to the pattern. He had, 2 days ago, put a name to it. He had not yet written the name on the parchment. He took out his quill. At the bottom of the parchment, in a very small, very careful, very neat hand, he wrote, "This is happening to me because I am performing a particular kind of cruelty in front of a particular child. The cruelty is being returned. I do not know who is doing the returning. The returning is, by my best calculation, threefold and exact." He looked at the line. He looked at it for a long minute. Then, because he had been a man who lived, by long practice, in the small private theater behind his face, and was unwilling to leave any line uncountered, he wrote beneath it, "Hypothesis 1, the boy is doing it. Unlikely. Children of his age cannot perform sustained, idiom-precise return at threefold weight without a foreign mechanism." Below that, Hypothesis 2, the headmaster is doing it. Unlikely. If Albus had this kind of mechanism on hand, he would have used it on me long before October. Below that, Hypothesis 3, a foreign mechanism, a mark, a ward. Something old. Below that, Hypothesis 4, a god. He looked at Hypothesis 4 for a long time. He drew beneath it a small line. He folded the parchment. He placed the parchment in his inner pocket. He stood. He went to teach a class. The hand that had folded the parchment was, by his quick read, steadier than it had any business being. He was, by long practice, the kind of man who could be steady in a hand that had no business being steady. He went and taught the class. He did not, in the class, take points from Gryffindor. By dinner, 3 Slytherins had asked him whether he was feeling all right. Minerva McGonagall, in her office at 5:30 on the afternoon of the 12th, looked at Severus Snape across her desk and said, "Severus, you are being odd." "I am fine, Minerva. You took no points off Potter this morning. He had given me no occasion." "He had given you an occasion before he had crossed the threshold of your classroom, Severus, by the standard of the last 6 weeks. Minerva, I am not unhappy about the change. I am observing the change." She poured tea. She poured tea the way Minerva poured tea, which was the way a Scottish woman who had been in her 60s for a great many years poured tea, with the brisk, impartial competence of a person who was not, by long practice, going to make a great fuss of any tea she had ever poured. She put a cup in front of him. She poured a second for herself. "You have, in the last week, become civil to a Gryffindor first year. Severus, what has happened to you?" Snape thought about it. He thought about telling her. He thought, in the small private theater behind his face, about taking the folded parchment out of his pocket and putting it on her desk. He thought about her reading it. He thought about her turning him into Albus. He thought about Albus's face at the news. He decided against it. I have been, he said, in the voice of a man placing a piece on a board, made aware recently that some of my pedagogical habits have not perhaps been as productive as they might have been. Goodness, you may write that down, Minerva, if you wish to. I have no need to write it down. I have been writing it down in my head for 15 years. She sipped her tea. She was, by long practice, the woman who, when handed a difficult conversation, did not raise her voice. Severus, I will not pretend not to be pleased. I will not pretend not to be surprised. I will, if it is helpful, pretend not to have noticed. That would be most helpful. Minerva, there is a thing I would, if you would indulge me, ask. Yes, is there in your knowledge any active ward in the castle, or on a single child in the castle, that returns cruelties performed against the child to their performers? She set down her cup. She looked at him. She said with the quiet, brisk precision of a woman who had not, in 50 years on a magical staff, been asked that question in those words, Number, you are sure. Severus, I am sure. There are several wards in the castle. There are no wards in the castle or on any of its children that I am aware of that perform that work. If there were, I would know. Severus, Minerva, thank you. I will trouble you no further on the matter. He rose. He bowed in the small, precise bow he made to women he respected. He left. McGonagall in her office sat for some time after he left without picking up her cup again. She had, in 50 years on a magical staff, asked herself a great many questions. She added one to the list. She did not write it down. She, by long practice, did not need to. Halfway down the corridor, Snape passed an unmoving suit of armor that had, by long station, never paid him the slightest attention. The armor turned its head as he went past. He did not, by any external evidence, react. In the small private theater behind his face, he added an entry to his list. By the end of October, 3 other Slytherins had joined the second year, and the dropped jar in being involuntary instruments of return. Draco Malfoy, in particular, had been having a difficult months. The trouble for Draco had begun on the train, in the form of a word he had used in front of 2 boys he had wanted to impress, and had, by the second week of October, broadened into a small, expanding social geography of inconveniences whose connection neither Draco nor his father had yet been able to draw. The painted ancestor of the Slytherin common room had, by mid-October, made the queries about Draco's grandmother on his father's side 3 more times, in front of audiences of varying noise levels. Lucius had written to Severus about it. Severus had read the letter. Severus had not, in the small private theater behind his face, replied. The new wave for Draco began on the morning of the 31st of October. He had in the corridor outside the Charms classroom at 9:15, in front of Pansy Parkinson and 3 other Slytherin first-years, and one passing Gryffindor named Ron Weasley, observed Ron's robes. He had observed Ron's robes the way a man with money observes robes that have been mended. He had then, in a voice that was meant to be heard, observed Ron's family. He had observed, specifically, that the Weasleys had more children than they could afford, and had then, in a fork that was meant to be heard, observed that this might explain their distinctive smell. Ron, who had been raised by a sensible woman and 4 older brothers, did not lift a fist. Ron, in the slow, careful way of a boy who had been told, more than once, by Bill Weasley, that there were certain words a man simply learned, said, "Sod off, Malfoy." Original, "Sod off, Malfoy. I'll take that under advisement." Pansy Parkinson laughed. Pansy Parkinson, 6 days later, would discover, in her family's December edition of the pureblood gossip rag Sang Per, a publication her mother subscribed to but had been pretending for years she did not, on the grounds that it was vulgar, a list of Malfoy household debts, itemized to 4 decimal places, that had been, by any sensible accounting of who was alive and who was dead and who held the books, impossible for the Sang Per columnist to know. The columnist had got them, the column claimed, from a concerned member of the Malfoy household. There was no such concerned member of the Malfoy household. The Malfoy household had a strict rule against concerned members. Pansy did not connect the December edition of Sang Per to the morning of the 31st of October, because the connection was not visible to Pansy. The connection was visible only to a small number of beings who did not, on principle, write to the pureblood gossip rags. Lucius Malfoy did not connect them either. Lucius wrote a furious letter to the Sang Per editor and demanded a retraction. The retraction was duly printed in the January edition. The retraction was, by the editor's own admission, a half-page in length and was at the back of the publication, on a page facing an advertisement for Cauldron Bottoms. The retraction did not undo the harm. The harm, by the time the retraction was printed, had had 2 months to cross-pollinate. In the Slytherin common room on the evening of the printing, Caspar Malfoy, the painted ancestor, was asked, by another portrait, what he had to say about all this. Caspar Malfoy had, in his long-painted afterlife, never before this October, paid the slightest attention to the conversation of the other portraits. He had developed, since October, a manner that was best described as conversational. He said, in the voice of an old Renaissance vagrant who has just spotted a saucer of milk, "Well, you know, my dear, I have always wondered." The other portrait, in due course, repeated this to its subject's grandniece, who, by the 3rd week of January, repeated it to her own grandnephew, who happened to be a low-level functionary at the Daily Prophet. The threefold of one corridor sneer is a long story. A great deal of arithmetic flows from a single line of social cruelty when the arithmetic is being performed by an attentive observer. Draco, by November, was no longer making jokes about the Weasleys. Halloween itself at Hogwarts did not need much help to be eventful. Hogwarts had, on most Halloweens it had observed, been able to manage on its own. This Halloween, the help came in the form of a troll. The troll was 12 feet tall. The troll was, in the small, precise idiom of trolls, ugly. The troll had been led into the castle through a corridor that was not, in the careful order of corridors, supposed to be unwarded on a feast night. The corridor's lack of warding had been the work, on this Halloween, of a man with a turban and a guest under it. The work had been, by the man with the turban's own private accounting, an experiment. The experiment had been, to see, by introducing a troll to a corridor in which a particular boy was likely to be at the appointed hour, whether anything interesting would happen to the boy, the troll, or both. The experiment was being conducted, in the small private theater behind the man with the turban's face, not by the man with the turban. The man with the turban was not, in any controlling sense, in a fit state to conduct experiments. The experiment was being conducted by his guest. His guest was, by his own historical accounting, an experimentalist of a particular kind, whose previous experiments had not always rewarded the materials. The materials on this Halloween were a Hogwarts first year named Hermione Granger and a Hogwarts first year named Harry Potter, who had been, by the small accumulating arithmetic of the school, growing into best friends faster than any of them had quite tracked. Hermione had spent the early part of the evening crying in the second-floor girls' bathroom on account of an overheard remark by Ron, in Charms, that had been substantially less cruel than the remark Draco had made on the train, but which had, in the precise idiom of Hermione's own small private theater, hurt her on principle. She had gone in to compose herself. She had still been composing herself when, at 7:30, the troll had come up the stairs. The troll did not, by any external evidence, know that Hermione was in the bathroom. The troll knew that the bathroom door was, of all the doors on the second floor, ajar. The troll, in the small, precise idiom of trolls, walked into the room with the door ajar. The bathroom, after the troll walked into it, was a different room. Hermione, against the far wall, did not scream. Hermione, in the small private theater behind her face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. She thought about wand placement. She thought about the door. She thought about whether Crouch's textbook contained a useful protective spell for a child of her year. She concluded that it did not. She thought about Ron Weasley, whom she had been, 25 minutes ago, slightly furious with. She thought about Harry, whom she had been, 2 days ago, watching with the careful sideways attention of a girl who had observed something she was not supposed to acknowledge having observed. She did not have the time to put any of these thoughts into action. She did have the time to step backwards, which she did. The door of the bathroom, which had been ajar, opened a second time. The opening was, by the small, precise idiom of Halloween's, dramatic. "Confuse it," said Ron in the doorway. "Ron, Hermione, get out the way." "How did you?" "Harry, Harry's behind me, Harry, look out." The troll turned. The troll had a club. The troll, in the small, precise idiom of trolls with clubs, raised the club. The club came down. The club came down where Hermione was no longer standing, because Harry in the doorway had, by an action that was, by the small private theater behind his face, 3/4 reflex and 1/4 11 years of practice in being where one was not expected to be, ducked under the troll's arm and pulled Hermione bodily out from under it. The club came down on the cubicle behind her. The cubicle in the small, precise idiom of cubicles ceased to be one. "Wand," Harry said. "What?" Hermione. "Wand. We need to." Yes, Ron, who had inherited a great many things from his older brothers, including a habit of reading the right line of his school books just often enough to remember a useful spell at an unhelpful moment, raised his wand. He said, Wingardium Leviosa, in the precise idiom in which Hermione had, the previous Wednesday at Charms, taught him to say it. The club, with the small, precise dignity of a club that had been abruptly addressed in Latin, lifted, hung, came down with the troll's own helping hand, and connected with the precise idiom of an inanimate object asked to perform a piece of physical poetry on its owner, with the troll's own head. The troll, in the small, precise idiom of trolls who have been hit on the head by their own clubs, sat down. The troll, in the small, precise idiom of trolls who have sat down, did not get up. The bathroom, after the troll did not get up, was a different room from either of the rooms it had been. 3 first-years stood in it. They looked at each other. They looked at the troll. Hermione, in a voice that had the small, steadying brisk of a girl who had, by long practice, the small, steadying brisk on standby, said, "Thank you." "You're welcome," said Ron, who had not yet caught up with what had happened. "You're welcome," said Harry, who had. The bathroom door opened a third time. The opening was less dramatic. McGonagall on the threshold, with Snape behind her, with Quirrell in his turban behind Snape, looked at the troll. She looked at the cubicles. She looked at the 3 first-years. Her face did the brisk Scottish thing it did when her face was not, by long practice, going to allow itself to do any of the other things her face was tempted to do. "Why," she said, "are you not in your dormitory?" Hermione, who had 10 quick rational things on standby and an 11th she had drafted while the troll had been raising its club, said in the voice of a girl who had been, by long practice, capable of being kind on principle, "Please, Professor McGonagall, they were looking for me. Miss Granger. I went looking for the troll because I'd read about them and I thought I could handle it. I'm so sorry, Professor. They came and found me. If they hadn't, I'd be dead. They saved me." McGonagall, who had been a Scottish brisk for 50 years and was, by long practice, an excellent reader of children, looked at the 3 of them. She looked at Hermione. She looked at Harry. She looked at Ron. She did not, by any external evidence, react. In the small private theater behind her face, she added an entry to her list. "Miss Granger," she said, 5 points from Gryffindor for serious lack of judgment. I am very disappointed in you. As for you 2 gentlemen, I award you each 5 points for sheer dumb luck. Now all of you return to your dormitories. The feast is being held in your houses tonight. You will eat there. Dismissed." They went. The corridor after they went was very quiet. Snape, on the threshold, watched McGonagall watch them go. He looked at his own hand, which was holding, in its own small private idiom of holding, the parchment in his pocket. He looked at the troll. He looked at Quirrell. Quirrell in his turban said, most RRR remarkable. ISH should examine." "You have, Professor," said Snape, in a voice that was very small and very precise, "a great deal of blood on your robe. SS something that fell in the CC corridor." He did not pursue. In the small private theater behind his face, he added another entry to his list. In the Gryffindor common room, after the feast was over and the prefects had gone to bed and the embers had dropped to a deep pulsing red and the 3 first-years had, by the cumulative arithmetic of an evening, ended up on the rug in front of the fire with the 4th-year curtains drawn behind them, Hermione spoke first. "You came to find me." "Yes," Harry said. "You shouldn't have. You shouldn't have, Harry." I was already in the bathroom, and the troll, you weren't when we came looking. You went in after we did. I did the math wrong by about 90 seconds. You did the math." "Yes," she looked at him. "Sometimes I think," she said, "that you don't talk like an 11-year-old. It's not a complaint, it's an observation." Ron, on the rug with his hands behind his head and his eyes on the rafters, said, "I think it's because he was raised by, what did you say, your aunt and uncle? Were they all right?" "They were," Harry said, in the small, careful voice of a boy who had practiced this answer 3 times in October without ever having said it out loud. "What they were." "What does that mean?" "It means," Harry said, "they were what they were." Ron looked at the rafters. Hermione looked at the rug. Harry looked at the fire. "You can tell us, Hermione said. "If you wanted to, we'd listen." "You don't have to." She took a breath. She let it out. "Harry, yes, there's a thing I read once in a book my mum had, about people returning to people who I never mind." "What kind of book?" "It was a Greek book, a Greek mythology book, about a goddess called Nemesis. She's the goddess of return," Harry said very quietly. The common room, at the precise second Harry said the word return, did not change in any manner Hermione could see. It did not, by any external evidence, change at all. It changed. Ron said in a small, puzzled voice, "Oh," said Harry. "Mate, yes. Did you do something? Number, are you sure?" "Yes, Ron. Are you sure you're sure?" "Yes, right." Ron put his hands behind his head. He stared at the rafters. He, in the small, steadying brisk of a boy who had 4 older brothers and a sensible mother, said, "Right, well, whatever it is, we're with you, right, Hermione?" "Yes," Hermione said, in the brisk, steady voice of a girl who had been about to ask a question and had been very politely talked out of asking it. "Yes, yes." "Right then," Ron said. "Right," said Harry. The fire, after a minute, dropped a coal. The three of them watched it for a long time without speaking. Then Hermione, in the brisk, practical voice of a girl who had read 7 full textbooks, said, "I'm going to bed." "Right," Ron said. "Don't in the morning do anything heroic." "I won't. Ron, I won't." Hermione. She went up the girls' staircase. She did not look back. She did not need to. That night, in a corridor that was not in the castle and not outside it, 4 figures had a brief conversation. "He's going to get the boy killed at this rate," said Hermes. "He is not," said Hades. "He is going to keep failing to get the boy killed. There is a difference." "There is a difference," Apollo agreed, who had in the previous half-hour composed 3 further bad limericks and was in the small private theater behind his face considering which one to deploy. "There is also a difference between failing to kill a boy and failing to fail to die in the attempt. The mark is patient. The host is finite. The host is meat," said Hades. "The host has, by my calculation, 2 years left. Most of 2 years, even if we are being generous." "What about the anchor?" said Hermes. "The anchors," said Hades, with the faint emphasis of a man who had read the Cosmic Register more carefully than the Cosmic Register's author had assumed any reader would, "are the actual problem. If our friend with the turban dies, the wraith goes to its next house. There are several houses. They have been, by my reckoning, hidden in objects with embarrassingly little regard for the long-term security of the collateral. At some point one of them, I do not yet know which, is going to be examined." "A wager," said Hermes. "You and your wagers. 20 drachmae says it isn't this year. 10 says it is. Done." Below them, at a distance, in a darker chair, in a colder room, the 5th figure looked up. "Hades." "Yes, sister. There is a tab, Voldemort. It is open. I am aware. It is, at this hour, 11 years and 9 months, and by my count, 3,078 separate items long. Several of them are heavy. Yes, it will be paid. I will not name the year. You may, between you, wager as you like. Very generous of you. It is not a generosity." The corridor closed. Snape, in the dungeons that night, sat at his desk and unfolded the parchment. He added the day's entries. Halloween, troll. Halloween, turban man bleeding from a leg. Halloween, Granger in a bathroom unwarded by her househead. Halloween, Potter retrieved her alone from a troll. Halloween, McGonagall awarded points for sheer dumb luck. Halloween, I have not today been visited by a ministry inspector or an instrument of return. Either the engine has paused or it is composing. He looked at the parchment. He looked at it for a long time. Then he wrote beneath it a question. The question had been on his mind for most of October. The question was, what happens when the engine reaches the wraith? He looked at the question. He drew beneath it a small line. He folded the parchment. In the corridor outside his lab, he found on the floor an envelope that had not been there an hour ago. He picked it up. He took it inside. He opened it. The envelope contained a single sheet of cheap parchment with a list, in a hand he did not recognize, of 17 separate occasions on which he had spoken cruelly in a public classroom to Neville Longbottom, with dates. Below the 17 entries in the same unfamiliar hand was a single sentence. The boy's grandmother has written to the headmaster about her grandson's nightmares. The headmaster has, on 3 separate occasions, mentioned your name to her over tea. This is, of course, unrelated. Snape stared at the sheet. He looked very carefully at the doorway. The doorway was empty. He looked very carefully around the lab. The lab was empty. He looked at the sheet again. He read it a 3rd time. He did not, by any external evidence, swear. He did not, by any external evidence, do anything that he would have been embarrassed to be seen doing. He was, by long practice, the kind of man who could read a sheet that had been left by a hand he did not recognize without doing anything that he would have been embarrassed to be seen doing. He folded the sheet. He placed it inside the parchment of his list. He did not throw it away. He sat down. He put both his elbows on the bench. He put his fingers into the long black sheet of his hair. He sat. For 10 minutes he did not move. Then he got up. He went down the corridor to a portrait of a small painted boy who was, by the long memory of the castle, the oldest child portrait still hanging at Hogwarts. He looked at the small painted boy. The small painted boy looked back. The small painted boy was, by the long memory of the castle, painted with the face of a boy who had been small enough in 1593 to fit in a corner of his mother's kitchen, and who had not, by that account, been treated kindly by anyone who had walked through it. "Severus," said the small painted boy. "Joseph, you have not come to see me in 12 years. I am aware. You used to come. I am aware. I have not in 12 years had an interesting conversation. The other portraits do not respect children. Why have you come, Severus?" Snape stood in the corridor, and the small private theater behind his face was for a moment very loud, and the words, when they came in the small, precise idiom of a man who did not, by long practice, let his words run on him. I would like, he said, to know whether you remember, by name, the children who have been treated unkindly in this corridor in the last 50 years. Severus. Yes. You cannot by yourself undo what has been done. I am aware. Then why do you ask? I am asking, Joseph, because I would like to start a list. The small painted boy looked at him. He said very gently, get a long parchment, Severus. There have been a great many. He went. He got a long parchment. He went back. He started a list. The list was not the same list as the parchment in his pocket. The list was a different list. It would, by the end of the year, be longer than he had hoped and shorter than he had feared. In the small private theater behind his face, he added a final entry to the parchment he had opened on the 11th of October. The final entry by the date of the 2nd of November was, I am keeping a different parchment now. The mechanism, whatever it is, may continue. I will continue with it. Below that he wrote, I am not, by any longer-running accounting, the only one keeping a list. He looked at the line. He drew beneath it a small line. He folded both parchments. In the small private theater behind his face, he was, after 12 years of silence, on speaking terms again with a small painted boy, in a corner of a corridor he had not walked since the year his last student had walked it. He would, by Christmas, have walked the corridor a great many times. At the precise edge of the forbidden forest, on the night of the 2nd of November, a centaur named Magorian raised his head and saw a woman in a long charcoal dress standing among the trees. The woman did not move. Magorian had been a centaur for 240 years. Magorian had read the stars long enough to know, when his eyes met the woman's eyes, who she was. He bowed. A second centaur, Bane, came up the slope behind him. Bane had not yet seen the woman. Magorian, without looking at Bane, said, down. Bane did not, in his small private theater of being a centaur named Bane, like being told down. Bane was the kind of centaur who, in the small, precise idiom of centaurs, preferred to bow on his own time. Bane started to ask why. Bane saw the woman. Bane bowed. She did not move. She did not, by any external evidence, acknowledge them. Magorian said, in the small, grave voice of a centaur who had been told, by his stars, of a great many things and who had read this one in particular more carefully than the rest, Lady, the stars say a great deal about a child who has been marked. The stars are saying it loudly. The woman in the trees looked at Magorian. She said in a voice that was very small and very precise, and was, by Magorian's accounting, the voice of a courthouse pronouncing a verdict, he is mine, the forest is his. Magorian bowed again. The woman was no longer in the trees. Bane, after a small interval, said, I do not like that. Magorian said, Bane, you do not have to like the stars. You have only to read them. The two centaurs walked, in the small, precise idiom of centaurs walking, back up the slope. The forest behind them was very quiet. In a corridor on the 3rd floor of the castle, 3 corridors and 1 staircase from the dungeon office of Severus Snape, a man with a turban stood very still with one hand on a cold stone wall. He had been standing very still for 11 minutes. He had been standing very still because the man inside the back of his head had been, since 8:15 that evening, in a state of cold sustained displeasure that had not, in 11 years of being a state of cold sustained displeasure, exactly behaved in this manner before. It is not, said the voice in the back of his head, very quietly, the boy. Master, it is not the boy. The boy did nothing. The boy stood there in the bathroom with the girl and pulled the girl, and the troll, it was not the boy, Queerness. My leg, your leg, Queerness, is also not the boy. There is a third thing. The man with the turban stood with his hand on the wall. He did not, in the brief inelegance of the simile, speak. His leg under the robe had a deep pucker in it, the size and shape of a club's blunt corner. The pucker was not, by any external evidence, a wound that had been inflicted in the bathroom. The pucker in the small private theater behind the man with the turban's face was where a wound had been intended to land on a child and had, in the small courteous way of returns, found a different door. There is, said the voice in the back of his head, very quietly, a third thing. Master, do not, Queerness, attempt magic against the child for a fortnight. I am examining. Why yes, master. The man with the turban in due course walked. He walked unevenly on account of his leg. He walked back to his chambers. He sat. He did not that night sleep. The man in the back of his head did not that night sleep. The arithmetic in the dark ran. Above the forest, on a balcony with no rail, a god of a particular kind looked at his cup and frowned. Hades, said Apollo, do we have a problem? We have, said Hades, a wraith with several anchors and a host with a sentimental interest in killing a particular boy. This is not a problem of a kind we have not seen. It is, even so, Apollo. Yes, don't. Apollo did not. He in the small private theater behind his face composed a fourth bad limerick and kept it for himself. Hermes, said Hades after a pause. Yes, tell me what you saw at the platform in September. He took a parcel from me without flinching. I have already told you. Tell me again. He took the parcel, he read the note, he folded the note, he put the note in his pocket. He did not ask the courier any questions. He did not look back at the courier. He acted on the note's instruction within the hour with the goblins in private without consulting his guardian. The goblins, I gather, found him polite. Polite Hades. Polite, polite. He is, in particular, the kind of polite that knows it is being given an instruction, and that does not need a label on the instruction in order to follow it. That kind of polite is, by my private accounting, the most useful kind of polite. It is, by mine, the kind of polite that ends careers in our line of work. The two of them drank. Apollo in the small private theater behind his face composed a fifth bad limerick about polite children and kept it for himself, this time with great difficulty. Below them, at a distance, in a darker chair in a colder room, the fifth figure read her ledger. She drew beneath the most recent entry a small line. She began to add, Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Queerness and the Itch. The Quidditch incident happened in the second week of November, on a wet Saturday in which the Hogwarts grounds had lain under 3 days of low, persistent cloud, and in which the air had developed that small smell of cold wood that came up at this time of year, and that Harry, by the second day, had decided to add to a small private list of things he liked. He was, by then, the youngest seeker in 100 years. He had not asked to be the youngest seeker in 100 years. McGonagall had observed him, in the first week of October, in the small private idiom in which she observed everything, and had made a decision the way McGonagall made decisions, which was efficiently. The broom had arrived. He had practiced. He had been, by the standards of the team, ready. What he had not been ready for was the broom developing a private mind of its own, 8 minutes into the match against Slytherin, in a manner that could not be explained by the wind. It was the precise idiom of the trouble that gave it away to one person on the staff bench. Snape, who had read his list every night for 38 consecutive evenings, registered, at the precise second the broom began to buck, that the broom was bucking on the precise rhythm of the cantrip he had been muttering, the previous Tuesday afternoon, against a piece of chalk in his lab as a private exercise in fine concentration. He had been doing the exercise, he was fond of saying when not pressed to think about it, to keep his hand in. The chalk had bucked. He had stopped the chalk. He had set down the chalk. He had thought no further about it. The broom in the rain was bucking on the same rhythm. The broom was being driven on that rhythm by a different cantrip, performed by a different person, with the same, by Snape's quick read, intent. The intent had not been malicious of itself. The intent had been, by the small private theater behind Snape's face, calibrated to test something. The someone calibrating it was, by the small private theater behind Snape's face, the man with the turban, 3 rows down on the staff bench, who was not, in fact, blinking. Snape muttered under his breath, a small, precise counter cantrip, in the precise idiom of the man with the turban's cantrip. The cantrip he muttered was the same cantrip he would have muttered if he had wanted, in the small private theater behind his face, to keep a piece of chalk on a desk where he had set it. The broom did not, by any external evidence, immediately stop bucking. The broom in the rain bucked harder. The man with the turban, 3 rows down, in the brief inelegance of the simile, sat down. He sat down in the way a man sits down who has been suddenly, without warning, struck behind the eyes by an instrument the size of a paperweight. He did not, by any external evidence, do anything else. He had a hand to his temple. The hand stayed at the temple. The temple, by the small private theater behind his face, had a small, precise red blur sitting on it that he had not been able to argue out of his temple since the second beat of the broom. The broom, on the rhythm of 2 simultaneous cantrips, kept bucking. Hermione in the stands did the only thing Hermione had ever in her life done in a situation in which 2 grown wizards were performing an arithmetic on a child she liked. She set fire to one of them. She did it, in fact, very calmly, with a small, precise spell from page 87 of her introductory wand handbook, on the hem of the man with the turban's robe. Snape, who had been 3 rows up the bench, the obvious target for any first year with a small, precise pyromaniac inclination and a slightly mistaken theory of the case, suffered no fire. Snape did, at the precise second Hermione's fire took, log a small entry in the small private theater behind his face. The small entry was, I owe a great deal of public reputation to Miss Granger's introductory pyromancy. He folded the entry. He, in the small, precise theater behind his face, kept it. The man with the turban in the staff bench beat at the hem of his robe. The man with the turban's cantrip, by the small, precise architecture of cantrips, broke. The broom in the rain bucked twice more on residual momentum and steadied. Harry, in the air on a broom that had stopped bucking, took 2 breaths and went looking for the snitch. He found it, he caught it, he almost swallowed it. He coughed, he landed. Hagrid in the stands was shouting. Ron in the stands was shouting. Hermione in the stands was in the small private theater behind her face, accounting for the architecture of what she had just done. She had set fire to a Hogwarts professor. She had set fire to a Hogwarts professor. She had set fire. There had been no other Hogwarts professor whose hem could have been set on fire that would not have been worse than the Hogwarts professor whose hem she had set on fire. She, by the brisk practical logic of a girl who had read 7 full textbooks, decided to keep this private until further notice. Snape, that evening in his lab, wrote in his column, Quidditch, counter cantrip. Q's host suffered the precise wound of Q's intended target. Counter and intent cancelled. Third-party Granger applied flame as catalytic distraction. Bucking ceased on residual momentum. Conclusion: the engine of return is operational against the wraith. The wraith has registered the operation. Below that he wrote, I am, by independent observation, no longer the only person in the castle who is keeping a list. He drew beneath it a small line. He folded the parchment. He went that night to the 3rd-floor corridor outside the chambers of the man with the turban, and he stood very still in the corridor for 10 minutes. He listened. He did not, by any external evidence, do anything else. The man with the turban in the chambers was not asleep. The man with the turban was, by Snape's quick read, sitting at his desk, with both hands on the desk, with his head bent, with the small private theater behind his face in a state Snape recognized from the small private theater behind his own. The man with the turban was making a list. Snape went, in due course, back to his lab. The man inside the back of the man with the turban's head, that night, made his own list. The list by the man inside the back of the man with the turban's head's reckoning had 3 columns. The first was things attempted. The second was outcomes intended. The third was outcomes received. The third column was a problem. The third column was, in the small, precise idiom of the third column, the same on every line. He read the column. He read it again. He sat back in the small private theater behind his host's face, and he allowed himself, for the small interval of an exhalation, the brief inelegance of being perplexed. He had not, in 11 years of being a particular kind of imperative, been perplexed. He, in the small, precise idiom of his own private accounting, had a hypothesis. His hypothesis, by the morning of the 3rd week of November, had names. The names were not, by his own private accounting, names he could plausibly entertain. The names were, in his canon, dust. He had, by long practice, no patience for dust. He had, by long practice, no time for the dust theology of Southern sea cultures. He had, by long practice, run his career on the principle that there were no powers older than wizards. He, in the small, precise idiom of his own private accounting, by the morning of the 3rd week of November, was reconsidering. By the 2nd week of December, Snape had stopped taking points off Harry on principle. He was not, by any external evidence, doing anything that he would have been embarrassed to be seen doing. He was, by long practice, the kind of man who could stop taking points off a Gryffindor first year for 36 consecutive class periods without doing anything that he would have been embarrassed to be seen doing. Harry, who had a small private list of his own running, registered the change. He did not, by any external evidence, react. In the small private theater behind his face, he added an entry. The entry was Snape, stopped 6 classes ago. Reason unknown to me, possibly unrelated. Possibly related. Watch. He watched. He had, by the 2nd week of December, become, by long practice, a watcher. He had been a watcher in some part of him for 11 years. He had been a watcher of a particular kind for 3 months. The watching was, by the brisk practical logic of a boy who had been a watcher for 11 years, paying off. Hermione, in the 2nd week of December, on the morning of the 17th, in the corridor outside the library, 2 hours after their last class before the holiday, in a voice that was very small and very careful, said, Harry, can I talk to you about a thing in private? Yes. They went, in the small, precise idiom of 2 children with a private thing to discuss, into a disused classroom on the 2nd floor. Hermione closed the door. Hermione, in the small private theater behind her face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. She thought about wand placement. She thought about the door. She thought about whether the disused classroom was warded against eavesdropping. She concluded that it was not. She placed, in the small, careful manner of a girl who had read a chapter on practical privacy, a small spell on the doorframe. Hermione, yes, you're going to ask me about Nemesis. She looked at him. Harry, yes. You said the word on Halloween. I know, you said it before I did, you knew, you've known, since when have you known? July, Harry, July, Hermione, and who? I don't know, I read about it, there's a book, there's a Greek mythology book my mum has. I asked mum to send it to me by owl. She sent it, it's in my trunk. The book says Nemesis is one of the older ones. She doesn't buy by the standard accounts interfere. She's exact. The book says she places marks, not often, almost never. The book says the marks are patient. They return, they threefold. She in the small private theater behind her face did a quick rational thing. Harry, do you know what threefold means? It means 3 times. It means 3 times the original cruelty in the original idiom applied to the original perpetrator. Harry, the book is from a Muggle press. The book is Harry. This isn't supposed to be a real thing in the wizarding canon. The wizarding canon doesn't include the Greek pantheon. It's not in any of my textbooks. It's not in any of my I checked all the indexes. Harry, you have a Greek goddess has placed a mark on you. Harry. What do you want me to say, Hermione? I don't know, I don't know, she stopped, she breathed. She in the small steady brisk of a girl who had been about to cry on principle and had decided by long practice against it did not cry. I'm glad that something is looking after you. I am in the careful order of my preferences very glad, but Harry, we're going to need to be very careful. I know, you can't tell anyone. I know, you can't tell Dumbledore. I know, you especially can't tell Snape. I know, Hermione. And you have to be kind. You have to be by careful preference kind. The book is very clear. The mark works on what is done to you. It does not work on what you do to others. But Harry, there is a question of who you become. The mark cannot make you a kind person. It can only make sure that the people who try to make you not kind are paid back for it. The kindness is yours. I know, you do. Hermione, I know I have thought about this. I thought about it in July. I thought about it in August. I thought about it in September. I thought about it on Halloween in front of the fire when you said the word. I thought about it last night. I'm thinking about it now. She looked at him. She in the small private theater behind her face allowed herself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be fond. She did not by any external evidence react. Okay, she said. Okay, I'm going to research quietly. I'm going to read the book. I'm going to write notes in a different cipher, not in plain text. I'm going to Harry. Yes, you should not be alone on this. I mean it. I know. Ron should know. Yes. We'll tell him at the train on the way home before Christmas. Yes. She paused. She looked at the door. Harry, yes. Are you okay? Are you holding up? Are you sleeping? Yes. Are you sure? Yes, Hermione. Are you sure you're sure? Yes. Right. She in the small steady brisk did another rational thing. Right. Lunch. They went to lunch. The mirror was on the 7th floor, in a disused classroom that was 3 doors down from a tapestry of dancing trolls, and that Harry, who had taken to walking at night in November, had found in the small private idiom of having found it by accident. He had stood in front of it, the night he had found it, for 1 hour and 17 minutes. He had stood in front of it the next night for an hour. He had stood in front of it on the 3rd night for 40 minutes. The duration, by his own quick read, was decreasing. He was, by his own quick read, learning. What he saw in the mirror was a man whose hair stuck up at the back and a woman whose eyes were the precise green of his own. The woman had her hand on his shoulder. The man stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder. Behind them, in a great long line, were people whose noses in profile repeated his nose. There were a great many people. They went back farther than he could see. He had, by the 3rd night, stopped trying to memorize their faces. He had, by the 3rd night, started, in the small private theater behind his face, simply being there, with them. He stood in the mirror's company in the way one might stand at a kitchen table at 3 a.m. with a cup of tea and a window. The mirror was, by his own private accounting, a window of a kind. On the 4th night when he came in, the mirror was, by external evidence, the same. The room was, by external evidence, the same. The room had, by external evidence, an additional inhabitant. Dumbledore, on a stool by the window, said, "Good evening, Harry." "Good evening, sir. Do come in, don't let me deprive you of your view." He came in. He stood at his accustomed angle. His parents looked back at him. Dumbledore on the stool did not look at the mirror. "You are," Dumbledore said, "the only one of 3 people in this castle who has, by my own observation, found this mirror this term. I do not, in the small private idiom of headmasters, give marks for finding mirrors. I do, in the small private idiom of headmasters, take an interest in what people see in them. They show me my parents, sir. Yes, I am sorry, sir, I should not be staring at them." Harry, sir, men have wasted away in front of this mirror. Men have lost the run of their days. Men have forgotten to eat. The mirror does not show us what is. The mirror shows us what is wanted. It is, in that small, precise sense, a kind of trap. It is not a kind of trap I begrudge any of its visitors. It is a kind of trap I am paid to notice when one of its visitors has been visiting too long. Yes, sir. You have been visiting, by my count, 4 nights. Yes, sir. That is, by my own private accounting, 2 more than is wise and 1 fewer than is unrecoverable. Do you know, Harry, what I see in this mirror? No, sir. I see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks. I am very fond, in the small private idiom of myself, of warm feet. One can never, in my experience, have enough socks. People insist on Christmas on giving me books. Books are wonderful. Socks, in my own private accounting, are wonderful in a different way. Yes, sir. Harry, the mirror will be moved tomorrow. Please do not look for it. It is being moved in part because of you, and in part because of other reasons that do not, at this hour, concern you. Have I your word that you will not look for it? Yes, sir. Good lad. Harry stood at his accustomed angle and looked at his parents. They were, in his last view of them, looking back. They had not, in any of his viewings of them, said anything. They were not, by the architecture of the mirror, the kind of figures that said anything. He, in the small private theater behind his face, said good night to them. He turned. He walked to the door. He stopped at the door. He did not look back. Sir, yes, thank you for knowing about the 4th night. Dumbledore on the stool did not turn his head. Good night, Harry. He went. In the chamber, after Harry left, Dumbledore sat for some time on his stool without moving. He did not, by any external evidence, do anything. In the small private theater behind his face, he did several quick rational things in quick succession. He thought about wand placement. He thought about the door. He thought about whether the disused classroom was warded against eavesdropping. He concluded that it was. He thought about a boy whose mother had loved him so completely that the love had outlasted her, and about whether the love, by his own private accounting, was the only thing standing between the boy and the dark. He thought, in the small private theater behind his face, that the love was, by his own private accounting, no longer the only thing standing between the boy and the dark. He did not, by any external evidence, decide what to do about it. He went to bed. On the train on the morning of the 20th, on the way back from the Christmas special early platform run that the school did for the children whose families wanted them home for the full break, Hermione had taken Ron and Harry into a compartment by themselves, and had drawn the blinds and had set, in the brisk, steady idiom of a girl who had read a chapter on practical privacy, a small spell on the doorframe. Right, Hermione had said. Ron, sit down. I am sitting down. Sit further down. Ron had sat further down. I am going to tell you, Hermione had said, a thing. I am going to tell you the thing because Harry has agreed I can tell you the thing. The thing is Ron about Harry. All right. Ron, Harry has been touched by an older power, older than wizards, older than us. Ron, the power is the goddess Nemesis, the Greek goddess, of return, of the careful return of cruelties to their performers, at threefold weight. Ron had looked at Hermione. Ron had looked at Harry. Ron had said in the small, steady voice of a boy who had been raised by a sensible woman and 4 older brothers, all right. Ron, all right. All right, Hermione, I'm not going to. What do you want me to say? He's our friend. He's, Hermione, mate. I've been wondering what was up since the train, the first one. He looked at Malfoy in a I haven't, Hermione. Sometimes you have to. I have 4 older brothers. I know when something is up. I have been biting, Hermione. Ron Weasley. Yes, you are surprising me. Hermione. Yes. I want you to know that I in particular have 10,000 things I want to ask. And I am, in the brisk practical logic of a boy with 4 older brothers, going to ask none of them. We're with you, mate. He had looked at Harry. We're that. Just when something happens, you tell us, so we don't think we're losing it. All right, Harry had said in the small, careful voice of a boy who had been carrying a thing on his own for 5 months and had, on the train on the morning of the 20th, registered in the small private theater behind his face that he was no longer carrying it on his own. Right then, Ron had said. Right, Hermione had said. Right, Harry had said. The compartment, after they had said right 3 times, had been quiet for a long minute. Then Ron had said, bloody hell, Greek mythology. Hermione had said, Ron, what? Don't say bloody hell about a goddess. Don't, in particular, say bloody hell about Nemesis. All right, Hermione. I am particularly serious about this one. All right, Hermione. The train had hummed in the small, precise idiom of a train that had been doing this for 120 years. The countryside had become hills. The hills had become wet. The light had become orange. Christmas at Hogwarts that year was a small thing. Hermione had gone home to her parents, on the train, on the morning of the 20th, with a substantial trunk and a substantial reading list, and one thick wool jumper she had, in the small private idiom of a girl who had once made a Weasley jumper by knitting it for the Weasley family in her own time, knitted herself for Ron and given him at the platform. Ron, who had not been told to expect it, had said, "Bloody hell," and had in the small private theater behind his face gone redder than his hair. Harry stayed. Ron stayed. The two of them on the morning of the 25th opened presents at the foot of Harry's bed in pajamas, with a fire that one of them had, with the brisk, steady help of a small candle that did not, by any external evidence, exist, brought up from embers without using a wand. Harry's pile was, by Harry's own private accounting, the largest pile of presents he had been in the company of in his life. He took a long time at it. He did not, by any external evidence, react. In the small private theater behind his face, he very carefully did. There was a Weasley jumper knitted maroon that came with a note from Mrs. Weasley that said, "We hope you have a lovely Christmas, dear. I hope this fits." There was a wooden flute from Hagrid that, when blown, sounded like an owl that had not in its life been a flute. There was from Hermione a book. The book was not, by external evidence, a Greek mythology book. The book was, by external evidence, a book on defensive theory. Inside the book, Hermione had pressed a small, folded sheet of paper. On the small, folded sheet of paper was a list of references. In a cipher Hermione had explained the basics of in October, that pointed to chapters in 5 different reference texts on the subject of Nemesis and 3 on the related subject of Hecate. There was from Sirius Black, who was not at this hour available to send anyone anything, nothing. There was from Ron a box of chocolate frogs. There was from a sender that had given no name and no return owl, a small, very old, very plain, very black coin. The coin had on its face an inscription in a language Harry could not read. On the reverse, the simple word "interested." He had by the second week of October accumulated 3 of these. He had not, by any external evidence, asked anyone what they were for. He had, in the small private theater behind his face, simply put them in the lining of his trunk. There was from his Aunt Petunia a 50-pence piece. He did not, by any external evidence, react to the 50-pence piece. In the small private theater behind his face, he very carefully did. He held the coin in his palm for a long minute. He thought about Petunia's mother. He thought about his own mother, whose face he had, until the previous month, seen only in a mirror. He thought in the small, steady brisk of a boy who had had 11 years of practice in the careful art of placing things, about where to place this. He placed it, in due course, in the lining of his trunk, next to the other coins. The coins in the lining did not, by any external evidence, react to one another. In the small private theater behind the lining, they sat together with the brisk, impartial dignity of coins of varying ages and varying issuers. Christmas dinner at the staff table, that year, was a small 10-place affair at one end of the Great Hall. There were 12 children left in the castle, between 4 houses, and there were 10 staff members who had not gone home, and there were 2 great roast geese, 3 plates of potatoes, a tureen of bread sauce, 4 bottles of a wine that Hagrid had, in the small private idiom of Hagrid, opened earlier than anyone else had thought wise, and a very small amount of patience between Snape and Hagrid that had been, by long practice, rationed to a single dinner per term. Dumbledore, at the head of the table, in a hat that had once been someone else's hat, said, "A toast to the children who have stayed." "To the children," said McGonagall. "To the children," said Snape, in a voice so small and precise that no one at the table noticed he had said it at all. McGonagall, who had been observing Snape for 50 years, and who had been observing him in particular for 2 months, did notice. She did not, by any external evidence, react. In the small private theater behind her face, she added an entry to her list. She watched Snape pass the bread sauce, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had not, in 20 years on the Hogwarts staff, ever passed a bread sauce without being asked. She watched him decline, with a small, precise nod, the wine. She watched him at the precise second one of the children at the long table, Harry Potter in fact, looked up at the staff table and met his eye, looked back. She watched Snape's face, in the precise idiom of a face which was not, by long practice, going to do anything, very carefully not do anything. She looked at her plate. She, in the small private theater behind her face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. She did not, by any external evidence, draw a conclusion. She, by long practice, allowed the conclusion, in due course, to draw itself. After dinner she walked, in the small precise idiom of a Scottish brisk who walked everywhere, with Snape down the corridor. She did not, by any external evidence, ask him a question. She, by long practice, did not need to ask. He, by long practice, could be relied on to volunteer. He volunteered at the corner of the second-floor corridor. Minerva. Yes, Severus. I have in the last 3 weeks made a small private list of children to whom I owe, by my own private accounting, a small private apology. I have not yet decided in what idiom to deliver these apologies. Severus. Yes. Deliver them in any idiom. Deliver them in the idiom that occurs to you. Deliver them, by long practice, on a Tuesday, when the children are tired and the corridors are empty. Make sure that when you deliver them, the children are not asked to acknowledge that you have delivered them. Tell them, in fact, very little. Make a small, precise gesture. Pour them a cup of tea. Hand them their parchment with no marks on the cover. This is not, Severus, advice you have asked me for. It is not. I am giving it to you anyway. Good night, Severus. Good night, Minerva. He went to the dungeons. She went up the staircase. Both of them, in the small private theater behind their faces, made a small, careful entry in a list neither of them had begun, by their own private accounting, on the same day. The two lists by their own private accounting were not the same list. They were in the careful order of the architecture parallel. That night in the hospital wing, Harry was, in the small private idiom of a Quidditch bruise that had, in the second week of December against Hufflepuff, been bigger than it had any business being, and had refused to heal at the small, steady rate at which most Quidditch bruises healed, sleeping with Madame Pomfrey at her desk, with one eye on him. In the chamber the man with the turban kept on the third floor on the same night, the man inside the back of the man with the turban's head, with the careful, steady brisk of an experimentalist who has been forbidden, in his own small private idiom, to attempt a magic against a child for a fortnight, decided to attempt a small, careful magic that was not, in his own small private idiom, against the child. He whispered, through 3 corridors and 1 wall, a small, precise curse. The curse was a curse he had used before on enemies who had been at 3 corridors and 1 wall. The curse was, by his own quick read, calibrated. The curse was, by his own quick read, addressed not to the child but to the air above the bruise. The air above the bruise, by the small precise idiom of air, did not receive the curse. The curse went, in the small precise idiom of returns, the long way around. The curse came back in the chamber on the 3rd floor on its caster. The man with the turban, by external evidence, did not react. The man inside the back of the man with the turban's head, by his own private accounting, sat up sharply in the small private theater behind his host's face and made, in the small precise idiom of one who has just been struck behind the eyes by an instrument the size of a paperweight, a noise. The man with the turban, by external evidence, the host, woke. The man with the turban looked at his hands. The man with the turban looked at his chambers. The man with the turban felt, on his own neck, the precise place a small precise curse had landed on the skin of a child whose Quidditch bruise had, in the 2nd week of December, refused to heal at the small steady rate at which most Quidditch bruises healed. The bruise on the man with the turban's neck was, by his own private accounting, the size of 3 Quidditch bruises. He sat. He did not, by any external evidence, react. In the small private theater behind his face, the man inside the back of the man with the turban's head, by his own private accounting, was very still. He said to the small private theater, very quietly, "It is not a ward." The man with the turban said, in the small private idiom of a host who had been listening for 11 minutes to a guest in his head, whose private accounting had, in the small private theater, gone very quiet, Master. "It is not, Queerness, a ward." Not a Master, what is it? It is, Queerness, an actor. It is, by my best calculation, an actor with a long memory and a careful column. It is, by my best calculation, a thing I had not believed in. It is, by my best calculation, going to be a difficulty. Master, Queerness, listen to me. We will not, between now and the end of this term, attempt magic against the child. We will, between now and the end of this term, examine the chambers of the school for an instrument of return. We will, between now and the end of this term, identify the actor. Why, yes, Master. And Queerness, yes. Bring me, by the 2nd week of January, a list of every named being, in every canon you can locate, who is in the business of returning cruelties at threefold weight. Why, yes, Master. All canons, Queerness. All CC canons. Including the ones that the wizarding canon does not, in its standard textbooks, include, especially those. Yes, Master. The chamber, after the man with the turban had spoken, was very quiet. In the hospital wing, 3 corridors and 1 wall away, Harry slept. Madame Pomfrey, at her desk, did not look up. She had, in the small private idiom of Madame Pomfrey, a great many small precise duties that did not include observing the precise second at which a Quidditch bruise on a sleeping first year, by the small precise idiom of bruises that had refused to heal, decided in due course to do so. The bruise, by morning, was gone. The man with the turban in his chambers, by morning, was not. In the dormitory at 3 a.m. on the night after Christmas, Harry sat up in his bed with his curtains drawn and his hands on his knees. He held up his right hand in the dark. He looked at the back of it. He turned the hand over. He looked at the palm. He, by no external apparatus, lit a small light above the palm. The light was not red. The light was not white. The light was the color of the inside of a candle when one looked at the flame from underneath it, and the world was behind it. He held the light. He looked at the hand under it. There was no mark on the hand. There had never been a mark on the hand to see. He let the light go. He, in the small private theater behind his face, knew. He had known in some part of him for a long time. He had had a piece of arithmetic running in the small private theater behind his face since the morning of the Tuesday after his birthday. He had, by the second week of December, completed it. He, in the brisk, steady idiom of a boy who had completed an arithmetic, did not, by any external evidence, react. In the small private theater behind his face, he very carefully did. He thought about what it would be, going forward, to have an instrument of return that he could not, by his own quick read, abuse. He thought about the column. He thought about the threefold. He thought about Aunt Petunia's hip and the dialect of the word boy and the 50-pence piece and the conservatory windows. He, in the small private theater behind his face, decided. The decision was not, by external evidence, a decision a small careful boy of 11 could make in the small private theater behind his face at 3 a.m. on the night after Christmas in a dormitory. The decision was, by external evidence, the decision of a small careful boy of 11 who had been a small careful boy of 11 for 11 years, and who had, by long practice, the small steady brisk of a boy who, at 3 a.m. on the night after Christmas in a dormitory, decided. The decision was, I will be kind on principle. I will not reach for it. I will not, by any external evidence, abuse it. I will keep my own column, and I will keep in the small private theater behind my face the column of the kindness I owe, and I will, by long practice, pay it. He lay back. He pulled the curtains tighter. He, in the small private theater behind his face, slept. Outside, on a draft of cold December wind, a black owl turned once on the night air and was gone. Far below, in a darker chair, in a colder room, Hades read a name on his death roll. The name was Lily Potter, and it had been on his roll for 10 years and 4 months, and it had not, in 10 years and 4 months, made him pause. Tonight it did. He looked at it for a long minute. He drew beneath it a small line. He kept reading. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Inheritance. The corridor that was nowhere in the castle came back to Harry on the night of the 7th of January, in his second week of term sleep, between 2 and 3 in the morning, with the precise courtesy of a corridor that had been waiting for an opening. It came in the form of a turn. He had been walking in his sleep, down the corridor outside the Gryffindor dormitory toward the staircase. He had taken 3 steps. He had taken a 4th step. The 4th step had landed not on the runner outside the Gryffindor dormitory, but on a different runner in a different corridor that was, in its small, precise idiom of being a corridor, longer than the corridor he had been walking down had been. He had registered the change without slowing. He had been, by long practice, the kind of boy who registered changes without slowing. Hecate was at the end of the corridor. She was, this time, not lit by herself. She was lit by candles in sconces that, by his quick read, had been arranged with a small, careful preference for symmetry. The candles were not the candle she had given him on the 1st of September. The candle she had given him on the 1st of September was in his palm when he held up the palm for it, alight. He held up the palm. The candle bloomed. He let it go. He walked toward her. Harry Potter. Lady, you have been studying. Yes, Hermione has been studying. You have been listening to Hermione. The two are not, in your case, distinguishable. Yes, what have you learned? He thought about it. He had, in the brisk, practical logic of a boy who had been listening to Hermione for nearly a month with a steady, careful attention, learned a great deal. He had learned that Nemesis was the daughter of Nyx, by whom he meant night, and was the sister of the Moirai, by whom Hermione meant the Fates, and was, by the small, precise idiom of older Theogenes, older than the Olympians. He had learned that Nemesis's older work had not been, by the precise idiom of the older work, only on individuals. He had learned that the older work had, on certain occasions, been on cities and on dynasties, and on a particular ship, the name of which Hermione had told him 3 times. He had learned that the favor, the kind of favor that had been placed on him in July, had not been placed, by Hermione's own quick read of 3 reference texts, on any named figure in the canon for several thousand years. He told her some of this. He left out the names. He left out the citations. He left out the small, careful trembling Hermione had developed by the second week of January over having told him these things. Hecate listened. She, by long practice, was the kind of being who listened in a manner that did not require an interlocutor's small, careful trembling to be reduced to the interlocutor's bare facts. When he had finished, she said, "Good, lady. You have, by my own private accounting, registered the architecture of your sponsor's favor with a clarity I would not have predicted in a child your age. I am interested in the clarity. Show me, child, the candle." Yes, he held up his palm. The candle bloomed. The candle held there. He, by his own quick read, did not allow the candle to brighten or dim. He held it. "Now," she said, without lighting a second one, without reaching, without taking, "show me, with the candle in your palm, that you can keep it small." He looked at her. He, in the small private theater behind his face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. He thought about wand placement. He thought about the corridor. He thought about the difference between holding a small light and using a small light, which was a difference Hermione had been, by the second week of January, very particular about. He thought about his sponsor, who had told him in July in his own ear that he could not, by any apparatus, abuse his mark. He thought about whether this small candle Hecate had lent him was the mark. He decided, on careful balance, that it was not. He decided that it was a different thing, lent on a different premise, with a different rule. He did, with the candle in his palm, what Hecate had asked. He held it small. He kept it small. He did not, by external evidence, reach for it. He did not, by external evidence, push it. He simply, in the small private theater behind his face, was where the candle was, and the candle, by long courtesy, was small. Hecate watched. She, by long practice, watched a great many things. She said after a moment, "Good, lady, child, I have a small thing to tell you, in the careful idiom of a thing that you have, by my own private accounting, earned the right to have told to you. May I tell it? Yes, my sister, who has placed your mark, will not, in the years that follow this one, be the only one of us who has an interest in you. Several of us are, by our own private accounting, interested. We will not, in the careful order of our preferences, take you. We will not, and this is the careful, precise distinction of the matter, make use of you. You will not, in the years that follow this one, be a piece on a board. You will be, by my own private accounting, looked in on. The looking in will be, by our own private preferences, kept light. Some of it will be theatrical, some of it will be cold, some of it will be merely curious. None of it will be, by my own private accounting and by my own private guarantee, predatory. Lady, yes, why are you telling me, or why are we interested? Both. You earned the telling by the question with the candle. We are interested because, child, there has not in 1500 years been a mortal child placed under my sister's mark. Some of us were beginning to wonder whether the mark had been retired. The mark evidently has not been retired. We are interested in what becomes of the bearer of the unretired mark. We are not, in the careful order of our preferences, going to interfere with what becomes of you. We are going to watch as a courtesy. Ladies, yes, will you tell me when you watch? Sometimes. Will you tell me when you don't? Number, he thought about it. All right, you take this well. I have, he said in the small, careful voice of a boy who had had 11 years of practice in the small private theater behind his face, taken a great many things by long practice well. She looked at him. She, in the small private theater behind her face, allowed herself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be fond. She did not, by any external evidence, react. Sleep well, Harry Potter. The corridor folded behind her. She was no longer where she had been. He, in the dormitory, opened his eyes. He did not, by any external evidence, move. He, in the small private theater behind his face, made a small, careful entry in a list he had been keeping, by long practice, since the morning of the Tuesday after his birthday. The entry was Hecate, watching, candle, lent on a different premise, not the mark. He, in due course, slept. In the small office on the 7th floor where the headmaster of Hogwarts kept, by long arrangement, a small, careful supply of yellow lemon-flavored sweets, Severus Snape sat in a chair that had not, by external evidence, been built for him. It was the second week of January. Dumbledore behind the desk said, "Severus, may I offer you a lemon drop?" "You may not." Albus. "Yes, Severus. I have in the last 3 months kept a list." "The list is particular." "The list, Albus, I would prefer not to read out the list. I would prefer to give you the headline of the list. The headline of the list is that I am of the considered opinion, by my own private accounting and by my own quick read of all the available evidence, that there is in this castle, on a child in this castle, a foreign mechanism of return that has been operating since the morning of the 1st of September. The mechanism is, by my own quick read, exact. The mechanism is, by my own quick read, proportional. The mechanism is, by my own quick read, operating at threefold weight." The office, after Snape stopped speaking, was quiet. Dumbledore did not immediately respond. He He did not, by any external evidence, react. He, in the small private theater behind his face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. He, by long practice, was the kind of headmaster who could be quiet for 30 seconds in a chair behind a desk while the man across the desk waited. He said in due course, "Severus." "Yes." "I am going to ask you, by way of confirming what you have told me, 3 small, precise questions. May I ask them?" "You may." "On the morning of the 1st of September, did you, in the corridor outside the Great Hall, lay eyes on Harry Potter?" "I did." "Did you, on the evening of the same day, find yourself in possession of a thought, in the small private theater behind your face, that you would not, by your own private accounting, have predicted yourself entertaining?" "I did." "Did the thought in the small private theater behind your face on the evening of the 1st of September take the small careful idiom of a question of who in the room with you at dinner was paying attention to whom?" "It did." Dumbledore, behind the desk, was quiet again. "Severus, may I ask one further question?" "Yes." "The list, the mechanism, the threefold. Have you, by your own private accounting, placed the mechanism's origin? Number. Have you, by your own private accounting, narrowed the mechanism's origin? To Albus, to a small careful field of by long practice older powers. Older powers, Albus, that the wizarding canon does not include in its standard textbooks. I see." Dumbledore, behind the desk, looked by external evidence at the lemon drops. He did not, by external evidence, take one. "Severus, I am going to ask you a small careful favor." "Yes." "Do not, in the months that follow this one, attempt to interfere with the mechanism. I have, by my own private accounting, been suspicious for some weeks. I have, by long practice, decided not to act on the suspicion. The mechanism is, by my own quick read, operating in the boy's favor. The boy, by my own private accounting, is owed an instrument of this kind. The boy is not, by my own private accounting, in a position to abuse it. The mechanism, by my own quick read of older theology, will not allow him to abuse it. Older theology, Albus. Yes, you have arrived at the same field. I have. How long have you, Albus? How long have you? I had a friend once, Severus. He was a man with a great many opinions about a great many things, and he was, in his own private accounting, particularly opinionated about the older theologies. He read, in his time, a great many books on the subject. He read me in his time a great many of the books. I have, between the two of us, Severus, a great many memorized passages. Does this surprise you? It does and it does not. Albus, yes. Will you, by way of professional courtesy, tell me which of them? Severus, yes. It is not, by my own quick read, my place to tell you which of them. It is, by my own quick read, the prerogative of the boy. You have asked the boy. I have not. Then, Severus. The boy has, by my own quick read, not invited the question. I will not, in the careful order of my preferences, ask him a question I have not been invited to ask. You may, if you wish, ask him yourself. I do not, by my own quick read, recommend it. Have you a lemon drop? Yes, Albus, I will. He took a lemon drop. He, in the small private theater behind his face, did not, by long practice, do anything else. He sat with the lemon drop in his palm for 30 seconds. He, in due course, ate the lemon drop. The lemon drop was, by his own quick read, sweet. He left. In the corridor, on the way down the stairs, he stopped at the small painted boy's portrait on the second-floor corridor. Joseph, Severus, I have, in the last hour, had a conversation with the headmaster. He is, by my own quick read, not surprised. He has been ahead of me for some weeks. Severus, yes, he has been ahead of you on this matter for 10 years. Joseph, Severus, he has been ahead of you on the matter of the boy for 10 years and 4 months. He has been ahead of you on the matter of the boy's mother for 32 years and 11 months. He has, by my own private accounting, been ahead of you on a great many things, and he has, by long practice, the small, careful courtesy to allow you to catch up to him on your own time. Good night, Severus. Good night, Joseph. He went, in due course, down the stairs. That same night, in the disused classroom on the second floor that Hermione had, by the second week of January, made a small, careful private library of, Hermione and Harry sat on either side of a low desk with 3 books open between them. The books were 3 of the 5 reference texts Hermione's mother had, by owl, sent in December. The books, by external evidence, were not Hogwarts library texts. The books were, by external evidence, the 3 small, careful textbooks of a Muggle classics undergraduate at a respectable Muggle university that Hermione's mother had kept since her own time as a student of comparative literature before becoming a dentist. Hermione had, by the second week of January, read all 3. She had read all 3, in fact, twice. She had, in the small, precise idiom of a girl who had been a precise idiom of a girl her whole life, made a chart. The chart had 4 columns. The first was name. The second was domain. The The third was noted historical favor of mortals. The fourth was noted historical idiom. The chart, by the second week of January, had 13 rows. Hecate, Hermione said quietly with a finger on the second column. Magic, crossroads, is well attested as showing interest in mortals her sister has touched on a polite basis. Idiom of interest, lent objects, lent crafts. Lent, and this is exact, Harry. This is the citation, the small, careful courtesy of an audience. She is, by the canon, a particular kind of courteous. Harry, the audience you got was, by my own quick read of these 3 books, courteous. Hades, king of the dead, is, by the canon, bored, aristocratic, affectionate when he is interested. He is, Harry, this is exact. This is the citation, known to send small, precise tokens to mortals whose mothers he has, in his own private accounting, paid particular attention to in the death roll. Tokens are usually coins. Harry looked at her. He, in the small private theater behind his face, registered a thing. Hermione, yes, I have 3 of them, 3 coins, sent by Owl in October, November, and at Christmas, black, inscribed. She looked at him. Harry, yes, where are they? In the lining of my trunk. Harry, yes, bring them. Hermione, it is 9:30 and curfew, bring them after curfew, I will wait. He went, he brought them, he set them in due course on the low desk between them. The 3 small black coins sat together with the brisk, impartial dignity of coins of varying ages and varying issuers. Hermione, in the small private theater behind her face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. She did not, by external evidence, do anything for 30 seconds. She said after 30 seconds in a voice that was very small, Harry, yes, this is Hades's idiom, citation, Hellenistic, 12 to 1300 BCA. He sends 3. He sends them in the first 6 months of his interest. He stops at 3. The third coin is, Harry, the third coin is, by the canon, a kind of endorsement. He is, by the canon, saying interested. Not in possession, in endorsement. Harry, he has been reading in his death roll your mother's name. He has, by the canon, paused over it. He has, by the canon, sent you 3. The third coin is, by the canon, the last. Harry, you have a uncle, by affectionate inference, of a particular professional sort, underground, Greek, king. She looked at him, he looked at her. In the small private theater behind both of their faces, a small, careful brisk took place. Neither of them, by external evidence, reacted. In due course, Hermione, in a voice that was very small, said, Apollo. Yes. Apollo will, by the canon, this is exact, this is the citation, send a small piece of bad verse. Bad verse, Harry, specifically bad. He is, in this idiom, annoyed not to have thought of the coin first. He will respond, by the canon, with a haiku. A haiku, Harry. She looked at the desk. The desk had, in the small, precise idiom of a desk that did not, by external evidence, do anything that desks did not, by external evidence, do on it, between the second and third coin, a small folded piece of paper that had not, by external evidence, been there 10 seconds ago. Hermione, in the small private theater behind her face, did not, by external evidence, react. She picked up the small folded piece of paper. She unfolded it. She read it. She folded it. She handed it in due course to Harry. He read it. The small folded piece of paper said, Hades sends a coin. Honestly, I'd have thought of sending 3. The cad, Harry, in the small private theater behind his face, did not, by external evidence, react. In due course, he in the small private theater behind his face did. He in the small private theater behind his face allowed himself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be amused. Hermione, yes, this confirms everything. It does. He's annoyed. He is the god of poetry. He is. And he sent a bad haiku. He did. By the canon, Harry, the haiku is supposed to be bad. The bad haiku is itself the joke. She looked at the haiku. She looked at Harry. They, in the small private theater behind both their faces, allowed themselves, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be children. They in due course both laughed. The disused classroom, after they laughed, was quieter than it had been before they had laughed. Then Hermione, in the brisk, steady idiom of a girl who had read 7 full textbooks and 1/4 of an eighth, said, Right. The chart. We continue with the chart. Right. She tapped the chart. She tapped it on the row called Apollo. Below Apollo on the chart, the next row was Themis. Below Themis on the chart, the next row was Voldemort. She had, by the second week of January, with the small, careful precision of a girl who had begun her chart in a Muggle exercise book and had in due course found it inadequate to the problem at hand, added a 13th row in a different ink. The 13th row's first column read Voldemort. The 13th row's second column read host, Quirrell suspected. The The 13th row's third column read tab, open, 11 years and counting, growing. The 13th row's fourth column read return, pending. She did not in the small private theater behind her face like the 13th row. She tapped the 13th row with one finger. Harry, yes. This is the row I have, by my own private accounting, been most worried about. The mark, Nemesis's mark, does not, by the canon, distinguish between the size of a wrong. It distinguishes only by the idiom of the wrong. A small wrong is returned at threefold weight in its small idiom. A great wrong is returned at threefold weight in its great idiom. The mark by the canon has in its time been heavy. Cities have fallen by the canon. Kings have died by the canon. The canon is clear. Harry. Voldemort has, by historical record, done a great many things. He has, by historical record, done to your mother a particular thing. The particular thing has, by the canon, a corresponding return. The return, Harry, the return is heavy. You should know what is, in the months that follow this one, going to happen when the engine gets to him. Or rather, when he, by the small, precise idiom of his own private accounting, gets to you. Do you understand what I am saying? Yes, Hermione. Are you sure? Yes. You are not going to, Harry. You are not going to do anything reckless, are you? Number, are you sure? Yes, Hermione. Are you sure you're sure? Yes. She looked at him. She, in the small private theater behind her face, allowed herself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be afraid. She did not, by external evidence, react. Right, she said. Right, we continue with the chart. Right, Harry. Yes, Hermione. There is one more row I have not yet read out to you. Hermes. All right. Hermes is, by the canon, a courier. He is, by the canon, a god of boarders, thieves, travelers, merchants, and Harry, children with hard journeys. He is, by the canon, the only Olympian who, by long practice, will speak to a mortal as a peer. He is, by the canon, the one who will, at the precise moment, hand the mortal a small parcel that the mortal needs. Harry, the man in Diagon Alley. Yes, the parcel. Yes, that was Hermes. Yes, Harry, yes. Hermes does not, by the canon, send 3. Hermes sends, by the canon, 1. Hermes sends, by the canon, once. He is, by the canon, the most efficient of them. Harry, the note in the parcel. The handwriting was green. Harry, Hermes writes, by the canon, in green. He has, by the canon, since 1300 BCA, written in green. She, in the small private theater behind her face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. She, in due course, in the small steady brisk of a girl who had read 7 full textbooks and was in the second week of January reading her 8th, said, all right. Then we have on the chart with confidence 5 entries: Nemesis, Hecate, Hades, Apollo, Hermes, and Themis. And Themis, yes, 6, Harry. Harry, yes, 6 is a great many. Harry. The canon does not, by long practice, gather 6 of them around any single mortal child since approximately the late Bronze Age. She looked at him. She, in the small private theater behind her face, allowed herself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be a girl her age. She did not, by external evidence, react. Harry, yes, you are going to be a great deal for a long time. You do know that, don't you? I am beginning to suspect Hermione. Right, she, in the brisk, steady idiom, did another rational thing. Right, we continue with the chart. Right. In a chamber on the 3rd floor of the castle, on the same night, the man inside the back of the man with the turban's head was, by his own private accounting, doing his own research. He had, in the second week of January, in accordance with his own instruction, demanded of his host the list of every named being, in every canon the host could locate, who was in the business of returning cruelties at threefold weight. The host had produced the list. The list, by his own quick read, had 2 short columns and a great many empty rows. The first column was, named beings, wizarding canon. The first column had, by his own quick read, 3 rows. The first row was, ancient wards on certain very particular lineages. The second row was, a small Slavic folk magic the canon had, by long practice, not considered serious. The third row was, nothing. The second column was, named beings, other canons. The second column was, by his own quick read, much longer. He read it. He read, in particular, the subcolumn that had, by his host's quick research, been compiled for the Greek pantheon. He read the row called Nemesis. He read the small, careful, clinical paragraph beneath it. He read the row called Hecate. He read the row called Hades. He read the row called Themis. He read the row called Apollo. He sat in the small private theater behind his host's face, with the parchment in his hands, and he did not, by external evidence, do anything for a long minute. Queerness, he said at last. Why yes, master. This paragraph on Nemesis. You have copied it from where? Master, from a Muggle reference text. The library does not have a copy. I had a small private copy from my own student years. Queerness. Why yes. You are telling me that the actor whose mechanism is operating in this castle at this hour on this child is by your own quick read, a thing the wizarding canon does not, by long practice, consider serious. Master, I am not, I am only copying what I have found. Queerness. Why yes. Allow me to consider this. Why yes, master. The man inside the back of the man with the turban's head considered. He considered for a very long time. He considered in the small private theater behind his host's face, with the small precise idiom of a man who had, by long practice, run his career on the principle that there were no powers older than wizards, and who was, by the second week of January, reconsidering. He decided in due course in the small private theater behind his host's face that the actor was, by his own quick read, a thing the wizarding canon did not, by long practice, consider serious because the actor had not, by long practice, given the wizarding canon any reason to consider it serious. He decided that the actor would, by the small precise idiom of his own private accounting, be reasoned with. He decided that he would, by the small precise idiom of his own private accounting, attempt the reasoning. He decided that he would attempt the reasoning by demonstrating to the actor that the actor's chosen child was, by his own private accounting, of insufficient interest to warrant the actor's continued attention. He decided that he would demonstrate this by, in due course, in the spring, separating the actor's chosen child from the actor's chosen mechanism. He decided that he would do this by, in due course, in the spring, making use of the stone. He decided that the stone, by the small precise idiom of his own quick read of the corridor on the third floor, was, by his own quick read, already in the castle. He, in the small private theater behind his host's face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. He, in due course, slept. The man with the turban, by external evidence, slept. Outside the chamber in the corridor on the way back to her own chambers, Minerva McGonagall, who had been, by long practice, the kind of headmistress who walked the corridors at 1 a.m. once a week, paused at the door of the man with the turban's chamber. She listened. She, by long practice, did not knock. She, in the small private theater behind her face, made a small careful entry on a list she had been keeping, by long practice, for 3 months. She had not, by external evidence, told anyone she had been keeping the list. She did not, by long practice, intend to tell anyone she had been keeping it. She walked in the small precise idiom of a Scottish brisk who walked everywhere on. In the same corridor at the same hour, Themis walked. She walked the perimeter of the castle's wards once. She walked them in the small precise idiom of Themis, slowly. She did not, by external evidence, do anything else. She arrived, in due course, at a particular point on the parapet, where Nemesis stood. The two of them did not, by external evidence, look at each other. They did not, by long practice, need to. Sister, it is balanced, said Themis, in the careful balanced idiom of a being who, by long practice, was always balanced. It was time. It is balanced. It was time. There will be a heavier balancing in due course. There will. You are patient, sister. I am patient. I am also exact. I will not interfere. You have not interfered in 1500 years. I will not interfere. Good night, sister. Good night, sister. Themis was no longer on the parapet. Nemesis stood there, in the cold January air, with her hands at her sides, with the small, careful precision of a being who had, by long practice, been the kind of being who stood on parapets in the cold January air for a long minute. She did not, by external evidence, move. In her hand, in the cold January air, was a parchment. The parchment was, by external evidence, a great deal longer than any parchment she had ever held in any of the other times she had stood on this parapet. She read it. She drew, beneath the most recent entry, a small line. She began to add. In the forbidden forest, on the same night, on a small slope above a small clearing, 2 centaurs stood in the cold January air with their breath, in the cold January air, making small careful clouds. Mygorian, Bane, the boy has been, by my reading of the stars, marked for some months. He has. The stars are louder this week. They are, Mygorian, saying a particular thing. They are saying that in the spring, on a night that has no moon, the wraith will attempt the boy. The stars are saying that the wraith will fail. The stars are, Mygorian, saying that the wraith will fail in a particular way. In what particular way, Bane? In the way of a man who has, in his own private accounting, been writing in a column for 11 years, and has not in 11 years looked at the bottom of the column. Mygorian, I do not, by my own private accounting, like the boy. I have not, by my own private accounting, ever liked the affairs of mortal children. I am, Mygorian, by long practice, a centaur who reads stars and does not, by long practice, intervene in the affairs of mortal children. The boy is, by my reading of the stars, going to be perfectly well without my liking him. Bane, yes, you are talking in the cold January air a great deal. I am. Why? Because, Mygorian, by the small careful idiom of one centaur to another, the stars are not, this week, only saying things about the boy. The stars are saying things about us. The stars are saying that, in the years that follow this one, the boy will pass through the forest a great many times. The stars are saying that we will, by long practice, have to make a small, precise decision about the boy. The stars are saying that the small, precise decision will, by long practice, set the precedent for several decisions of our own herd's relations with mortal children for several centuries. The stars are saying that the decision will, by long practice, be made by me, Mygorian. Yes, I do not, by my own private accounting, want to make that decision. Bane, yes, read the stars. I am reading the stars. Read them again. Bane stood in the cold January air with his hands at his sides and read the stars. He read them for a very long time. He read them in the careful, small, precise idiom of a centaur who had been a careful, small, precise idiom of a centaur for 200 years slowly. He said at last, Mygorian, yes. In the spring, on a night that has no moon, the wraith will attempt the boy. The wraith will fail. The boy will, by long practice, leave the school for the summer and return in September. The boy will, in the years that follow this one, pass through the forest a great many times. The boy will, on the 17th of August in the 5th year of his Hogwarts attendance, pass through the forest in a manner that requires me to make the decision the stars have, in the cold January air, asked me about. Mygorian. The decision is, Mygorian, the decision is to bow. I will not, by my own private accounting, like it. Bane, you do not have to like the stars. You have only to read them. The two centaurs walked, in the small, precise idiom of centaurs walking, back up the slope. The forest behind them was very quiet. In a corridor on the 3rd floor of the castle, behind a door that had been, by long practice, locked since the first day of term, in a chamber that had been, by long practice, the chamber the man with the turban kept his lists in, the stone which had been, by external evidence, already in the castle, behind a great many small, careful, precise wards, sat in a velvet pouch under the floorboard he had, by his own quick read, found in the 3rd week of October, and waited. It would, by the small, precise idiom of small, careful, precise stones, not have to wait long. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, the ledger reads itself. 3 weeks before the end of term, Hagrid had, in a manner only Hagrid could have, hatched a Norwegian ridgeback in a fireplace. The dragon had been the size of a beetle when he hatched. The dragon had been the size of a small ferret a week later. The dragon had been the size of a ham hock the week after that. The dragon, by the 2nd week of May, had set fire to Hagrid's beard 4 times, eaten a full crate of dead rats, and bitten Ron Weasley's hand, by Ron's own quick read, on principle. He's a baby, said Hagrid. He's a hazard, said Hermione. Both can be true, said Harry. The dragon had to go. The dragon went, in the brisk, steady idiom of a plan Hermione had drafted on the back of a charms practice sheet, on the night of the 2nd of May, by way of the astronomy tower, in a crate, into the hands of Ron's older brother Charlie's friends, who had a dragon reserve in Romania. Hermione's plan worked. Hermione's plan had not, by Hermione's own quick read, accounted for Filch. Filch caught them, at 11:15, in the corridor on the 7th floor with the invisibility cloak in their arms, 3 minutes after they had handed off the crate. The detention was set for the following Saturday at midnight, in the Forbidden Forest, with Hagrid and Filch and a small, careful contingent of professors who had been, by external evidence, particularly displeased by the invisibility cloak detail. The detail Snape was particularly displeased by was, by his own private accounting, the 3rd year and a half running in which he had been asked to explain, to a headmaster who had asked him exactly this question on 3 previous occasions, why an 11-year-old had an invisibility cloak. He had, by his own quick read, no answer that the headmaster did not, by long practice, already know. The detention was, in the small, precise idiom of midnight detentions in the Forbidden Forest, dark. Harry walked with Hagrid and Hermione down a small, careful track for about an hour, in the small, precise idiom of a track that had been a small, careful track for 200 years, and stopped in due course at a clearing in which a unicorn lay on its side with a great deal of blood on its flank and a great deal of silver on the leaves around it. The unicorn was, by external evidence, dead. Hagrid said, in the small, steady voice of a man who had spent a great many of his nights with great many of the creatures who lived in the small, precise idiom of the Forbidden Forest. Aye. We've found one, Hagrid, Hermione said very quietly. What does this? What does this? It's a thing as kills unicorns, Hermione. There ain't many. It's a thing as drinks the blood, see, while the unicorn's still, Hermione. You don't want to, Hagrid. Yes, Hermione. What kills unicorns and drinks their blood is, by every textbook I have read on the subject, a thing that has, by the canon of every textbook, no soul of its own and is, by long practice, borrowing one. The thing that is doing this in the forest is Hagrid, by my own quick read, a wraith with a host. Hagrid. Is the wraith by your own quick read in the castle? Hagrid did not, by external evidence, answer. Hagrid did not, by long practice, answer questions of that kind. Hagrid, in the small private theater behind his face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. He in due course said, we're going to split up. Hagrid. Hermione, we got to find what done this. We got to, Harry, you'll go with Malfoy. Hermione, you'll go with me. Filch'll go on his own, and he'll, Filch can take care o' himself. The forest, after Hagrid said the word split, was very quiet. In due course they split. Harry walked with Draco, in the small precise idiom of two boys who had not, by external evidence, walked anywhere together since the morning of the 1st of September, down a small careful path for 15 minutes. Draco did not, by external evidence, say anything for the 15 minutes. Draco did, by external evidence, walk a half-step behind Harry and a quarter-step to his left, in a precise small careful arrangement that allowed him, in the small private theater behind his face, to keep both Harry and the path in his line of sight at once. Harry, in the small private theater behind his face, registered the arrangement. He, by long practice, did not react. The path opened. The path opened in the small precise idiom of paths that opened on a clearing. In the clearing was a second unicorn on its side, with a great deal of blood on its flank. Above the second unicorn was a figure in a black cloak, with its head bent, with the small precise idiom of a figure that was, by all external evidence, drinking from the wound on the unicorn's flank. Draco, behind Harry, made a small careful noise that was, in the small private theater behind his face, an entirely involuntary noise. The figure in the black cloak raised its head. The figure had, where its face should have been, a face. The face was the face of a man with a turban. The turban was, by external evidence, off. Where the turban had been on the back of the head of the man was a second face. The second face was, by external evidence, paler and less eyed and more snake than the front face was. The second face's mouth was, by external evidence, full of unicorn blood. The figure in the black cloak, on registering Harry, did not, by external evidence, react. The face on the back of the head, in the small private theater behind it, did several quick rational things in quick succession. The face on the back of the head said, in a voice that was very quiet and very precise and was, by long practice, the voice of a man who had been a particular kind of imperative for 11 years, queerness. Why yes, master, drop the unicorn. Why yes, master, walk 3 paces to the left, queerness, and look at the boy. Why yes, master. The figure in the black cloak walked 3 paces to the left. The figure looked at Harry. The figure had, in the small precise idiom of figures that had been drinking unicorn blood, blood on its mouth. Draco, behind Harry, took 2 careful steps backward. Draco, in the small private theater behind his face, was, by external evidence, doing several quick rational things in quick succession. Harry, in front of Draco, did not move. He, in the small private theater behind his face, ran the column. He ran it quickly. He had, by long practice, become quick at running the column. The column said, a man with a turban is, by external evidence, harboring a wraith. The wraith is, by external evidence, drinking unicorn blood to keep its host alive. The wraith has, by external evidence, been attempting magic against me since November, and the magic has, by external evidence, been returning to the wraith's host at threefold weight. The wraith has, by external evidence, in the last 20 seconds, registered me. The wraith has, by external evidence, not yet attempted magic against me at this hour. If the wraith, by external evidence, attempts magic against me at this hour, the magic will return to the wraith's host at threefold weight. The wraith, by external evidence, knows this. He, in the small private theater behind his face, registered that the wraith was, for the first interval since the beginning of the year, uncertain. The wraith said, in the small, careful, precise idiom of a being that had not, by long practice, been uncertain in 11 years, boy, yes, you, by my own quick read, know what I am. Yes. You, by my own quick read, know what is protecting you. Yes, you, by my own quick read, cannot wield the protection. The wraith was, by external evidence, quiet for a long second. I, by my own quick read, could kill your friend. You could. His name, boy, Draco Malfoy. The protection by my own quick read does not, by long practice, extend to him. It does not. The wraith stood in the small, precise idiom of a wraith that had, by long practice, never been at a tactical impasse, with its mouth full of unicorn blood and its host in a black cloak and the back of its host's head looking, by external evidence, at an 11-year-old boy who had, by external evidence, no expression on his face. In the small private theater behind the wraith's face, the wraith did several quick rational things in quick succession. It decided at last on a different course. Quirinus, the wraith said very quietly, "Walk, master, walk, Quirinus, past the boy, down the path, out of the clearing. We will not in this clearing attempt anything further." Why, yes, master." The figure in the black cloak walked. The figure walked past Harry at a distance of, by external evidence, 3 feet. The figure did not, by external evidence, look at him as it passed. The figure walked, in the small, precise idiom of a figure that had been wearing a black cloak for 2 hours, down the path and out of the clearing. The path closed. Draco, behind Harry, sat down. Harry, in front of Draco, in the small private theater behind his face, allowed himself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be relieved. He turned to Draco. "Malfoy, up. Malfoy. Potter, up, Malfoy, we have to go. Hagrid is half a mile that way. Hermione is with him. Filch is somewhere. Up." Draco, by external evidence, got up. Draco's robes had, by external evidence, a great deal of forest mud on them. Draco's hands had, by external evidence, a small careful tremor in them that he was, by external evidence, not in any position to argue out of his hands. Draco walked in the small, precise idiom of a boy who had had 11 years of practice in not walking next to the boy. He was now walking next to Harry, down the path. The path took them, in due course, to the edge of the forest, where a centaur stood under a low pine. The centaur was Firenze. Firenze said in the small, grave voice of a centaur who had been a small, grave voice of a centaur for 90 years, "Harry Potter, you are, by my reading of the stars, well met in this clearing. I have, by my reading of the stars, a small, careful thing to tell you. Yes, the wraith you have just stood in front of will, in the night that is to come, attempt you a second time. It will, by my reading of the stars, attempt you with the stone in front of it. In a chamber it does not, by my reading of the stars, have the keys to. It will, by my reading of the stars, fail. The failure will be, by my reading of the stars, exact. I have a great deal of respect, by my own reading of the stars, for what is in this forest with you tonight, child. The forest is, by my reading of the stars, on your side. The forest is, by long practice, not on the wraiths. We will, in the night that is to come, do a small careful thing for you, of which you will not, by long practice, be informed. Thank you. You are most welcome, Harry Potter." He, in due course, walked, with Draco half a step behind him, the rest of the way to Hagrid. The chamber Firenze had spoken of, by external evidence, was on the 3rd floor. The chamber on the 3rd floor was, by external evidence, behind a door that had been, by long practice, locked since the first day of term. The chamber on the 3rd floor was, by external evidence, accessed from a corridor that had been, by long practice, declared off-limits to students by the headmaster on the morning of the 1st of September, on pain, in his own words, of a very painful death. By the small, precise idiom of corridors that had been declared off-limits on pain of a very painful death, the corridor on the 3rd floor had been, by external evidence, the most thoroughly visited corridor in the castle since the morning of the 1st of September, by every student in the castle who had a sense of irony and a working pair of feet. Harry, by external evidence, had a sense of irony and a working pair of feet. He had, by long practice, not visited the corridor. He, in the small private theater behind his face, had been, by his own quick read, waiting for an occasion. The occasion was, by external evidence, the 3rd of June. He, in the brisk, steady idiom of a boy who had read 7 full textbooks and a fourth of an eighth, and was, by the 3rd of June, reading 2 of his own selection, knew in the small private theater behind his face that the wraith would, by external evidence, attempt the stone that night, that the headmaster had, by external evidence, been called away on a contrived urgent matter at the ministry, and that the only members of the staff who had, by external evidence, the small, careful, precise idiom to stop the wraith were, by external evidence, McGonagall, who was teaching, and Snape, who was, by external evidence, in his lab. He, in the small private theater behind his face, had a column. The column said, "I am the only one in this castle, at this hour, who can, by long practice, walk into the chamber on the 3rd floor and stop the wraith, because I am the only one in this castle who has, by long practice, an instrument that the wraith cannot, by long practice, defeat." He, in the brisk, steady idiom of a boy who had become, by long practice, comfortable with reading his own column, told Hermione and Ron. They went. The chamber on the 3rd floor behind the door had a Cerberus on it. Hagrid had, by external evidence, mentioned the Cerberus's name. on a Friday afternoon in the Three Broomsticks, 2 weeks ago, to a stranger in a hooded cloak. Hagrid's mention had been, by his own quick read, a small careful slip, and had been by Hermione's own quick read, the kind of small careful slip that happened to people who had been, by long practice, raised by Hagrid. The Cerberus's name was Fluffy. Fluffy slept by external evidence when one played him music. Hermione had brought, by external evidence, a flute. Ron had brought, by external evidence, the invisibility cloak. Harry had brought, by external evidence, his small candle in his palm and his wand at his hip, and the third coin from Hades in the lining of his pocket. They went down through the trapdoor. Devil's Snare was the first chamber. Hermione, who had read the chapter on Devil's Snare in October, and had, by her own quick read, retained every word of it, said, "Sunlight," or a small careful flame. She raised her wand. She, in the small steady idiom of a girl who had set fire to a Hogwarts professor's hem, did the spell. The Devil's Snare, in the small precise idiom of a devil's snare that had been, by external evidence, addressed in Latin, retreated. The three of them, by external evidence, fell through. The keys were the second chamber. Harry, who had been the youngest seeker in 100 years, looked at the keys, looked at the brooms in the rack, and looked at the three of them. He said, "It's me." "It's you," said Ron. "It is by external evidence you," said Hermione. He flew, he caught the key, he landed. The chess was the third chamber. The chess was, in the small precise idiom of a chamber that had been designed by McGonagall in the small steady brisk of a Scottish brisk who, by long practice, did not lose at chess hard. Ron, who had been, by long practice, raised by 4 older brothers and a sensible mother, and was, by long practice, the kind of boy who had been playing wizard's chess since he had been 3, took the white side. He, in the small steady brisk of a boy who had been playing wizard's chess since he had been 3, played. He played for 14 minutes. He, in the 15th minute, said, "I'll have to take their queen." "Ron, it's the only way through, Hermione. Once they take me you can." "Ron, Hermione, listen, I'll take their queen, they'll take my knight, their bishop will come for me, I'll be all right, they aren't real, they're chess pieces, the worst they'll do is knock me unconscious." "Hermione, Harry, you'll go on, you'll get the stone, you'll go on, yes." Hermione, in the small private theater behind her face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. She, in due course, in the small steady brisk of a girl who had read 7 full textbooks, and was, in the small steady brisk of the moment, going to keep her head, said, "Yes, Ron." "Right," Ron said. He moved his knight. The white queen took the black queen. The black bishop, in the small precise idiom of a bishop that had been waiting since November to make this particular move, took Ron's knight in the same line, with the dull steady weight of a chess piece doing what a chess piece had been carved for. Ron, on the chessboard, in the small steady brisk of a boy who had been playing wizard's chess since he had been 3, sat down. Ron, on the chessboard, did not get up. Harry took 2 steps toward him. Hermione, in the brisk steady idiom of a girl who had read the chapter on the chess room twice, said, "He's all right, he's just knocked." Madame Pomfrey set him right. "Harry, we have to keep going." "Harry, he's all right." They kept going. The 4th chamber was the troll. The troll, by external evidence, had already been knocked unconscious by another tenant of the castle, which Hermione, in the brisk steady idiom of a girl who had, by external evidence, observed 3 separate dropped clues, identified in due course as Quirrell on his way down. They stepped over the troll. The 5th chamber was potions. The 5th chamber was, by external evidence, designed by Snape. The 5th chamber was Hermione's. She read the small, careful, precise riddle on the parchment. She read it again. She read it in the small, steady brisk of a girl who had, by external evidence, been raised by parents who were dentists and was, by long practice, very good at riddles 3 times. She poured the potion. She, in the brisk, steady idiom of a girl who had read every word of every textbook on her shelf and 1/4 of an eighth, and was, in the small, steady brisk of the moment, going to be quick about it, said, "Harry, I will, by my own quick read, drink the small purple bottle and walk back. You will drink the round black bottle and go through. I will go back, get Ron, get Madame Pomfrey, send Dumbledore an owl. You will go through. You will, by external evidence, not die." "I won't die, Hermione." "You won't." "I won't." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Are you sure you're sure?" "Yes, Hermione." "Right." She drank her bottle. She, in the small, careful brisk of a girl who, by long practice, could not pretend not to be afraid, did not pretend not to be afraid. She put a hand briefly on his shoulder. She turned. She walked back through the flames, which, by external evidence, did not touch her. He drank his bottle. He walked through. The 6th chamber was the mirror. The mirror was the same mirror it had been on the 7th floor in November. The mirror had, by external evidence, been moved. In front of the mirror, with his back to Harry, with the small, precise idiom of a man who was, by external evidence, looking at himself with all his attention, was the man with the turban. The man with the turban turned around. The turban was, by external evidence, off. The face on the front of the man's head was, by external evidence, pale and tired and steady. The face on the back of the man's head was, by external evidence, paler and snakier, and was, by external evidence, looking at Harry with the small, careful, precise idiom of a wraith that had been waiting for this conversation for 11 years. "Harry Potter," said the wraith. "Yes, you by my own quick read have come. I have, you by my own quick read know what is in this room with you. Yes, you by my own quick read have not by long practice come alone. Number." The wraith, in the small, careful, precise idiom of a wraith that had been waiting for this conversation, was, by external evidence, no longer uncertain. "Boy. The mirror by my own quick read does not give the stone to me. The mirror by my own quick read does not give the stone to my host. The mirror by my own quick read gives the stone only to, by long practice, a being who wants the stone but does not, by long practice, want to use it. Boy, come, look, in the mirror, tell me what you see. Number, boy." Number, the wraith, in the small, careful, precise idiom of a wraith that had been waiting for 11 years for this conversation, did not, by external evidence, react. The wraith, by external evidence, did several quick rational things in the small, private theater behind its face. The wraith, in due course, said, "Quirinus, kill him. Master, kill him, Quirinus, kill him with the killing curse. Now, Quirinus, with the wand on your hip. Now." The man with the turban, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had been, by long practice, a host for 11 years, raised his wand. He spoke the killing curse. The killing curse left the wand. The killing curse, by external evidence, did not reach Harry. The killing curse, in the small, precise idiom of a curse that had been thrown against a child who had been marked, by long practice, to receive no curse of any kind without a corresponding return, found, in the small, private theater of the chamber, a different door. The door it found, by the small, careful, precise idiom of returns, was the door of the man who had thrown it. The man with the turban, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had received his own killing curse at threefold weight, did not, by external evidence, finish the second word of the second sentence he had been planning to say. The man with the turban, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had received his own killing curse at threefold weight, fell. The man with the turban, on the floor of the chamber, was, by external evidence, dead. The wraith on the back of the man with the turban's head was, by external evidence, not. The wraith on the back of the man with the turban's head, in the small, careful, precise idiom of a wraith that had had 11 years of practice in being on the back of someone's head, rose, in the small, precise idiom of a smoke that had decided, in its own private accounting, to be a smoke for the small interval of a moment. The wraith said, in the small, precise idiom of a wraith that had had a long career of saying things in the small, precise idiom, "Boy, you, by my own quick read, have won. This, by my own quick read, does not end the matter. I will, by my own quick read, return. You will, by my own quick read, be ready." The wraith looked at him. Harry, in the small, precise idiom of a boy who had, by long practice, 11 years of being looked at, did not, by external evidence, react. In the small, private theater behind his face, he very carefully did. He thought about the column. He thought about the threefold. He thought about the 11-year tab Hermione had drawn on the chart in green ink. He thought about the killing curse. He thought about a woman in a charcoal dress, in the door of a kitchen in Privet Drive, on the morning of the 31st of July. He thought very carefully about what it would have been to be his mother on the morning of the 31st of October, in a small house in Godric's Hollow, with a wand in her hand and a child behind her, and an arithmetic, in the small private theater behind her face, that had not, by long practice, been completed. He thought. He, in the small private theater behind his face, said to the wraith, without his mouth, in the small careful idiom of a boy whose sponsor had taught him, in July, the difference between a thought said with a mouth and a thought delivered, then come. The wraith heard. The wraith, in the small precise idiom of a wraith that had, by long practice, never been delivered a single sentence in that idiom, registered the delivery. The wraith, in the small precise idiom of a wraith that had 11 years of accumulated tab, suddenly, felt in the small private theater behind its face, the column under the tab, read itself. The column read in the small careful idiom of a column that had been, by long practice, kept by a particular kind of accountant, 3,078 separate items. The column read them, by long practice, in the order in which they had been written. The column read them in the precise idiom in which they had been written. The column read in the small careful idiom of a column the names, Lily, James, their son, the Bones family, the McKinnons, Mary MacDonald, Marlene. The list by long practice was long. The wraith by external evidence did not react. In the small private theater behind the wraith's face, the wraith by external evidence did several quick rational things in quick succession. The wraith was by long practice, the kind of being who could read a column of 3,078 separate items in the small private theater behind its face, without doing anything that would be embarrassing to be seen doing. The wraith was by long practice, the kind of being who could be, for the small interval of an exhalation, terrified. The wraith in the small precise idiom of a wraith that had 11 years of accumulated tab and that had been in this very chamber in the moment of the killing curse, drawn in front of the column of its own tab in the careful precise reading order, was by external evidence, by long practice, no longer in this chamber. The wraith fled. The smoke in the small precise idiom of smoke that had, by long practice, been a wraith for 11 years, went out of the chamber, up through the ceiling, out through the corridor on the 3rd floor, out through the 2nd floor, out through a window that had not, by long practice, been opened in 11 years, and into the air over the forbidden forest on a draught of warm June wind, and away. Harry in the chamber on the floor, with the man with the turban dead at his feet, did not, by external evidence, move for 30 seconds. In the small private theater behind his face, he allowed himself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be 11. He sat down. He, in due course, on the floor of the chamber, in front of the mirror, with his hands on his knees, picked up the stone, which had by external evidence fallen out of his pocket 2 seconds ago, and put it back. He had by external evidence the stone. He did not by long practice want to use it. The mirror by long practice had given it. He waited. In a chamber on Olympus, on a balcony with no rail, 4 figures were doing several small, careful, precise things in quick succession. "He's done it," said Hermes. "He has," said Hades. "By the canon, he should be, by external evidence, terrified. He is. And instead, he is sitting on the floor. He is. He is by the canon 11. He is. 10 silver to Hades on the wager," said Apollo. "Pay up, Hermes," said Hades. "You said it would happen this year. It happened this year. The wraith fled. The wager was by your own quick read closed." "It was," said Hermes, in the brisk small idiom of a god who had, by long practice, been a god of merchants for 3,000 years and was, by long practice, going to honor a wager. "Pay up." He paid up. Below them, at a distance, in a darker chair, in a colder room, the 5th figure read her ledger. She had, by long practice, the kind of patience that had, in 11 years, never been disturbed. She drew, beneath the most recent entry, a small line. She wrote beneath the line a single sentence. The sentence was, "Tab paid in part." She drew, beneath the sentence, a small line. She kept reading. In the corridor outside the chamber on the 3rd floor, 2 minutes later, Snape, who had by external evidence been running, with McGonagall, who had by external evidence been running, and Madame Pomfrey, who had by external evidence been running, arrived. They went down through the trapdoor. They came up through the chambers. They came, in due course, into the mirror chamber. They looked at the man with the turban on the floor. They looked at Harry on the floor with the stone in his hand. They looked in due course at each other. McGonagall, in the small, precise idiom of a Scottish brisk who, by long practice, did not raise her voice, said, "Oh, Mr. Potter." Snape, in the small, private theater behind his face, did not, by external evidence, react. Madame Pomfrey, in the brisk, steady idiom of a school nurse who, by long practice, had been a school nurse for 30 years, knelt by Harry. She, in due course, lifted him. Harry, in her arms, on the way to the hospital wing, did not, by external evidence, say anything. In the chamber, after they left, Snape did not move. He stood in the small, precise idiom of a man who, by long practice, did not move in the doorway of the chamber. He looked at the man with the turban on the floor. He looked at the mirror. He, in the small, private theater behind his face, did several quick, rational things in quick succession. He, in due course, bowed his head. It looked, to no one watching in particular, like apology. He stood there, by external evidence, for a long minute. In due course he, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had a great many things to do, did them. He attended to the body. He went up. He filed his paperwork. Hermione and Ron came on the morning of the 2nd day. Hermione had a stack of textbooks she had, by external evidence, been carrying for the entire week and was, by external evidence, very firmly intending Harry to read. Ron had, by external evidence, a chocolate frog. Ron's left arm was in a sling, in the small, precise idiom of a sling that had been set by Madame Pomfrey at midnight in a corridor full of moving chess pieces, and Ron's left ear had a small, precise white plaster on it. "You all right, mate?" said Ron. "You." "Knight took me on the side of the head. Pomfrey says, concussion, a small one. She's keeping me overnight tonight as well." Hermione says I have to drink 5 glasses of water a day. Hermione is being Hermione. Ron, yes Hermione, 5 glasses is the recommended hydration for a concussion. It is in the school nurse's reference handbook on page 47. Mate, Ron said to Harry, she really did read every word of every book on her shelf. Hermione, in the small private theater behind her face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. She in due course sat down on the edge of Harry's bed. Harry, yes Hermione. Did the wraith by external evidence flee? Yes. Did the host by external evidence die? Yes. Did the killing curse by external evidence return? Yes. Threefold. She in the small steady brisk of a girl who had been keeping a chart in a muggle exercise book for 7 months and was, by external evidence, keeping it now, allowed herself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be relieved. Right, she said. Right, said Harry. Right, said Ron. The 3 of them in the small steady brisk sat on the bed for a while without speaking. Madame Pomfrey, at her desk at the other end of the wing, in the small precise idiom of a school nurse who had been, by long practice, a school nurse for 30 years, did not, by external evidence, intervene. She had by long practice learned the small careful idiom of 3 first-years who had been, by external evidence, through a thing. In due course Ron, in the brisk steady idiom of a boy who had 4 older brothers and had been by long practice raised by them, said, I have a question. Yes, Harry said. You knew before you went down, you knew what would happen, didn't you, with the curse? I suspected. Are you all right, mate? Are you sure? Yes. Are you sure you're sure? Yes, right, then I am, by long practice, not going to make a fuss about it. Right. Hermione, who had been about to make a fuss about it, looked at Ron. Ron, who had been raised by a sensible woman and 4 older brothers, looked back. Hermione, who had been about to make a fuss about it, did not in the small steady brisk make a fuss about it. She looked at the ceiling. She in the small private theater behind her face made a small careful entry in a list she had been keeping by long practice for 7 months that read, Ron is, by long practice, sometimes in the small precise idiom of his older brothers, very much a Weasley. Right, she said. Right, said Ron. Right, said Harry. In the hospital wing, 3 days later, when Harry, by external evidence, was awake and sitting up and eating a great many sweets, Dumbledore, on a stool by the bed, said, Harry, sir, you have, by external evidence, had a difficult week. I have, by external evidence, not been told the whole of the difficult week. I have, by external evidence, not asked. I would, by external evidence, like very much to ask. I am, by long practice, not going to. Harry, yes, sir. Your mother, by external evidence, loved you very much. I know, sir. There is, in the world, a great many older instruments than the love of a mother, Harry. The love of a mother, by external evidence, is, by my own quick read, an instrument enough. There may be, by my own quick read, others. I do not, by external evidence, need to know them. I do, by long practice, need to know that you are, by external evidence, all right. I am, sir. Are you? Yes. Are you sure? Yes, sir. Are you sure you're sure? Yes, sir. Dumbledore on the stool looked, by external evidence, at the lemon drops in his palm. He did not, by external evidence, take one. Good night, Harry. Good night, sir. He went. In the doorway of the hospital wing, after Dumbledore left, Snape stood. He looked at Harry, by external evidence, asleep, with one hand on the small black coin he had, by external evidence, taken out of his pocket 2 minutes ago and was now, by external evidence, holding. Snape did not, by external evidence, do anything. He, in the small private theater behind his face, did several quick rational things in quick succession. He, in due course, bowed his head. It looked, to no one watching in particular, like apology. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. What returns the final feast was a Gryffindor feast in the end. It had not, by external evidence, looked like a Gryffindor feast on the morning of the day the points were tallied. It had looked, by external evidence, like a Slytherin feast. Green hangings, silver banners, a small careful Slytherin first-year named Pansy Parkinson sitting at the high end of the Slytherin table, with the small careful precise idiom of a girl who had, by external evidence, been told by her mother, by Owl, that the long-expected house cup was, by external evidence, hers and that she was to enjoy it. Pansy was, by external evidence, enjoying it. By the time the fish course came around, Dumbledore, at the head of the staff table, in the small precise idiom of a headmaster who had a great many last-minute points to award, awarded a great many last-minute points. He awarded 50 to Hermione Granger for the use of cool logic in the face of fire. He awarded 50 to Ronald Weasley for the best-played game of chess Hogwarts had seen in many years. He awarded 60 to Harry Potter for pure nerve and outstanding courage. He awarded 10 to Neville Longbottom in a small, careful aside on the small, careful, precise courage required to stand up to one's friends, an aside that, by external evidence, made Neville Longbottom, in the middle of the Gryffindor table, go redder than he had ever gone in his life. The Slytherin table did, by external evidence, not get its feast. The Gryffindor table got, by external evidence, the feast it had not, by long practice, expected. Draco Malfoy, in the small, precise idiom of a boy who had had a difficult year, sat in the middle of the Slytherin table with his hands flat on the wood and a piece of fish on his plate that he had not, by external evidence, lifted to his mouth. He did not, by external evidence, react. In the small, private theater behind his face, he very carefully did. He, in the small, private theater behind his face, was, by external evidence, vibrating. The vibration was, by external evidence, the small, precise idiom of a boy who had, in the careful, private idiom of his year, been, by external evidence, paid back for a great many small, precise idioms of his own. He did not, by external evidence, look at Harry. Harry, in the middle of the Gryffindor table, with his hand on the small black coin he had, by external evidence, taken out of his pocket 2 minutes ago for no reason he could plausibly articulate, did not, by external evidence, look at him either. He, in the small private theater behind his face, allowed himself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to enjoy this. He had, by long practice, been a boy who, by long practice, did not, by external evidence, enjoy things very much. He had, in the brisk, steady idiom of his year, decided that this was a small, careful, precise thing he was, by his own private accounting, allowed to enjoy. The mark was not, by his own quick read, doing this. The points had been, by external evidence, awarded by Dumbledore. The points had been, by external evidence, earned. The pleasure was, by his own quick read, his. He enjoyed it. In the brief quiet between the dessert plates being cleared and the staff standing for the school song, McGonagall, at the high table, looked, by external evidence, at Snape. Snape looked back. McGonagall, in the small, precise idiom of a Scottish brisk who by long practice did not raise her voice, said, in a voice meant to be heard only by Snape, Severus. Yes, Minerva, you have, by external evidence, had a difficult year. I have. You have, by external evidence, ended it on a different note than you started it. I have, Minerva. Yes, I have, in the small private theater behind my face, by long practice, a great deal of work to do over the summer. You have, I will, by long practice, not be telling you in detail what the work is. You will not, Severus. Yes, I will, by long practice, not be asking. Good night, Severus. Good night, Minerva. The small painted boy on the second-floor corridor that night, when Snape walked past him on the way back to the dungeons, said, in the small, careful, precise idiom of a small painted boy who had been a small painted boy for 400 years, good night, Severus. Snape, in the small, precise idiom of a man who, by long practice, did not, by external evidence, react, said, good night, Joseph. He went, by external evidence, to bed. The train home on the morning of the 18th was a smaller and quieter and more tired train than the train down had been. The compartment had, by external evidence, 4 occupants. Hermione had in due course brought Neville. Neville had, in the careful private idiom of a boy who had been awarded 10 points by the headmaster, become, by external evidence, in the last 3 days an occupant. He sat in the corner with his toad on his lap and a small, careful, precise paperback he had, by external evidence, been reading on a recommendation of Hermione. That had, by external evidence, been a mistake. He was not, by external evidence, finishing it. Hermione, with a small, careful, precise notebook in her lap, said, right, summer plans. Hermione, yes, Ron, it's the train home. We are not at this very moment making summer plans. We are exchanging summer plans. Right, exchanging. Harry will go to his aunt and Uncle S. Ron will go to the burrow. I will go home with my parents. I will write to both of you in code every Sunday. The code will be Harry. The code will be the cipher I taught you in October. Ron, you will not, by external evidence, get the code. Ron, you will get a different code. The different code will be, by external evidence, the cipher I will teach you on the platform in 5 minutes before we get off the train. Hermione, Ron. Yes, Hermione. I have, by my own private accounting, been very afraid for both of you for some weeks. I would, by my own private accounting, like to write to both of you in a manner I am, by my own private accounting, comfortable with. All right, Hermione. Thank you. Hermione, Harry said in the small, careful, precise idiom of a boy who had read in the cipher 3 full reference texts in the last 6 weeks. The code can wait until the platform. We have until the platform. Right, and we should, by external evidence, also eat. The trolley is here. Right, and Neville, you are not eating your sandwich. I am eating it. Eat it faster. Yes, Harry, the trolley arrived, they ate. They ate in the careful, steady idiom of 4 11-year-olds who had, by external evidence, had a year, all the sweets they had, by long practice, ever wanted to eat in a single sitting, and in the small, careful, precise idiom of having eaten them, more. Neville, at 1 o'clock, fell asleep in the corner with the toad on his chest. Hermione, at 1:15, fell asleep with her head on the window and her small, careful, precise notebook open in her lap. Ron, at 1:30, fell asleep with his mouth open and a wrapper still in his hand. Harry, at 1:35, did not, by external evidence, fall asleep. He, in the small private theater behind his face, kept watch. He had, by long practice, been the kind of boy who, by long practice, kept watch. At King's Cross, at 5:15, the train came to its small, precise platform. The four of them, in the small, precise idiom of 4 11-year-olds who had had a year, said the small, precise idiom of goodbyes that they had, by long practice, never said in their lives. Hermione, in the brisk, steady idiom of a girl who had read 7 full textbooks and was, by external evidence, going to keep her head, hugged Harry. She hugged Ron, she hugged Neville. She, in the small, private theater behind her face, allowed herself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be afraid for them. She did not, by external evidence, react. Ron, in the brisk, steady idiom of a boy who had 4 older brothers and had been, by long practice, raised by them, did not, by external evidence, hug. He, by external evidence, punched Harry on the shoulder. He, by external evidence, punched Hermione on the shoulder. He, by external evidence, punched Neville on the shoulder. He, by external evidence, said, "Right then." Neville, in the small, careful, precise idiom of a boy who had been awarded 10 points by the headmaster, said, "Right." Harry, in the small, careful, precise idiom of a boy who had had a year, said, "Right." On the platform between the brick wall and the Muggle taxis on the morning of the 18th, Mrs. Weasley, in the small, precise idiom of a woman who had, by external evidence, been a Mrs. Weasley for 23 years, hugged Harry in the careful, steady idiom of a hug that had not, by external evidence, been on her schedule. She hugged him, by external evidence, longer than she had hugged Ron. She, in due course, in the small, precise idiom of a woman who had not, by external evidence, made a fuss in front of a great many witnesses for several years, did not, by external evidence, make a fuss. Harry, "Yes, Mrs. Weasley, you will, by external evidence, write to us. Yes, Mrs. Weasley, you will, by external evidence, eat. Yes, Mrs. Weasley, you will, by external evidence," in the careful, precise idiom of a boy who has been, by long practice, a small, precise idiom of a particular kind of summer, not Harry, not let them make you small. Yes, Mrs. Weasley. She, by external evidence, let go. Hermione's parents had, by external evidence, come up to the platform from the Muggle side with the other Muggle parents, in the small, precise idiom of 2 Muggle dentists who had been told, in late August of the previous year, that their only daughter was a witch and were, by external evidence, 11 months on, still, by external evidence, adjusting. They, by external evidence, did not hug Harry because they had not, by external evidence, ever met him. They, by external evidence, looked at him with the careful, precise idiom of 2 parents who had been, by external evidence, told a great many things about him by their daughter in 573 letters. Mrs. Granger, in the small, precise idiom of a woman who, by long practice, was, by external evidence, kind, said, "Harry, we are very pleased to meet you. Hermione has, Mum. Hermione has spoken of you a great deal. Hermione would, by external evidence, like to know that you are, by external evidence, well. I am Mrs. Granger, thank you." Mr. Granger, in the small, precise idiom of a man who, by long practice, was a small, precise idiom of a man, said, "Hermione tells us you have, by external evidence, had a year. I have. Hermione also tells us you have, by external evidence, friends. I have. Hermione would, by external evidence, like us to know, Harry, that you are, in particular, in the careful, steady idiom of a girl who, by external evidence, has read 7 full textbooks and 1/4 of an eighth, her best friend." Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione, in the small, precise idiom of a girl who had been, by long practice, raised by Muggle dentists, did not, by external evidence, react. "Right," Harry said. "Right," Hermione said. He went in due course with his trunk through the brick wall into the world. The Dursleys were on the other side of the brick wall. Vernon was, by external evidence, exactly the Vernon he had been on the morning of the 31st of July. The conservatory windows had, by external evidence, been refunded in 3 installments. The Drill Inc. board had, by external evidence, declined to renew Vernon's contract for the autumn quarter, but had, by external evidence, kept him on a half-pay arrangement so as not to embarrass the company on the Birmingham firm side. Vernon had, by external evidence, lost a great deal of weight, and had, by external evidence, gained a great deal of red in the face. Petunia was, by external evidence, exactly the Petunia she had been on the morning of the 31st of July, only thinner, and with a great deal of small, careful, precise wear on the corners of her mouth that had not, by external evidence, been there in July. Dudley, by external evidence, was the smallest he had been in 2 years. Vernon said in the small, precise idiom of a man who had, by external evidence, been waiting for this moment for 10 months. Boy. Yes, Uncle Vernon. You will in this house behave yourself. Yes, Uncle Vernon. You will in this house not speak of that place. Yes, Uncle Vernon. You will in this house do as you are told. Yes, Uncle Vernon. The car ride home was, by external evidence, quiet. The driveway was, by external evidence, the driveway of number 4 Privet Drive. The front door was, by external evidence, the front door of number 4 Privet Drive. The hall was, by external evidence, the hall of number 4 Privet Drive. The cupboard under the stairs, by external evidence, had a new lock on it. The lock had been put on, by external evidence, in November. Vernon had, by external evidence, in November, on the day after a particularly bad week at Drill Inc., put a lock on the cupboard under the stairs, in case the boy returned for the summer, in case the boy got any ideas, in case the boy, and so on. The lock was, by external evidence, a deadbolt. The deadbolt was, by external evidence, going to spend the summer being unused. The boy, by external evidence, had not, by external evidence, slept in the cupboard under the stairs since the morning of the 31st of July. He had, by external evidence, slept for the last 10 months in a dormitory. He, by external evidence, would now, by external evidence, sleep in the second bedroom. Petunia in the kitchen on the first morning said, in the small, precise idiom of a woman who had, by external evidence, been waiting for this moment for 10 months. Boy. Yes, Aunt Petunia. Bacon, and don't burn it. Yes, Aunt Petunia. Don't sass, I didn't, and don't talk back. He, by external evidence, did the bacon. He did not, by external evidence, sass. He did not, by external evidence, talk back. He, in the small private theater behind his face, did not, by external evidence, react. Petunia at the toaster, in the small, precise idiom of a woman who had been a small, precise idiom of a woman for 42 years, said, very crisply, honestly, skinny like a stalk and clumsy like a gosling. Don't drop the plates. He had, by external evidence, not been about to drop the plates. In the small private theater behind Petunia's face, in the small precise idiom of a woman who had been a small precise idiom of a woman for 42 years, a small careful entry was, by external evidence, made on a list she did not, by external evidence, know was being kept. In the small private theater behind a woman who was, by external evidence, in the corner of the kitchen, the entry was logged. Petunia, by external evidence, looked at the toaster. The toaster was, by external evidence, fine. Petunia, by external evidence, looked at the bacon. The bacon was, by external evidence, fine. Petunia, by external evidence, looked at Harry. Harry was, by external evidence, fine. Petunia, in the small, precise idiom of a woman who had been a small, precise idiom of a woman for 42 years, said, in a voice that had, by external evidence, taken her by surprise as it left her mouth, in the small, precise idiom of her own mother, in the precise pitch of her own mother, in the precise idiom of an evening in 1957 in a kitchen in Cokeworth with a small, careful, precise younger sister at a stove. Lily, you'll be the death of me. The kitchen, after Petunia said the word Lily, was, by external evidence, very quiet. Petunia put both her hands on the counter. She, by external evidence, did not move. In the small private theater behind her face, in the small precise idiom of a woman who had not, by external evidence, said her sister's name out loud in 15 years, Petunia, by external evidence, did several quick rational things in quick succession. She, in the small private theater behind her face, was, by external evidence, 8 years old. She, in the small private theater behind her face, was, by external evidence, in a kitchen in Cokeworth with her mother at a stove and her younger sister at a stool, and her younger sister was, by external evidence, 6 years old, and the younger sister had, by external evidence, just turned the kettle on without being asked. And her mother, in the small, precise idiom of her mother, had said, in a voice that had, by external evidence, been meant kindly and had, by external evidence, landed on the older sister, in the careful, precise idiom of an aside like a hammer, Lily, you'll be the death of me. Petunia, in the small private theater behind her face, was, by external evidence, no longer in the small private theater behind her face. She was, by external evidence, in the kitchen. She, by external evidence, sat down. She, by external evidence, put her face in her hands. She, by external evidence, cried. She cried, by external evidence, for 19 minutes. She cried in the small, precise idiom of a woman who had not, by external evidence, cried in the kitchen since the morning of the 2nd of November, 1981. Vernon, in the dining room, by external evidence, did not come in. Vernon, by external evidence, had heard the word Lily from the dining room, and had, by external evidence, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had, by external evidence, been a small, precise idiom of a man for 43 years, decided that he was, by external evidence, not going to come in. Dudley, in the living room, by external evidence, did not come in either. Harry, at the bacon, by external evidence, took the bacon off the stove. He, by external evidence, set it on a plate. He, by external evidence, stood for a long minute by the stove with his hands on the rail of the stove and his eyes, in the small, precise idiom of an 11-year-old boy who had been 11 for 10 months and had had, by long practice, a great many opportunities to make a small, careful, precise decision on the back of his aunt's head. He, in the small, private theater behind his face, did several quick, rational things in quick succession. He, in due course, put the plate of bacon on the table. He, in due course, put the kettle on. He, in due course, made tea. He, in due course, set a cup in front of his aunt. He, in due course, sat down at the table beside her. He did not, by external evidence, say anything for a long minute. In the small, private theater behind his face, he allowed himself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be kind. The Mark, by his own quick read, did not, by external evidence, do this. The Mark could not, by his own quick read, do this. The kindness was, by his own quick read, his. She, by external evidence, did not look up. He, by external evidence, sat. After a minute he said, very quietly, Aunt Petunia. Yes, drink your tea. She drank her tea. She, in due course, in the small, precise idiom of a woman who had not, by external evidence, looked at her nephew for any sustained period of time in 11 years, looked at him. She, in the small, private theater behind her face, did several quick, rational things in quick succession. She did not, by external evidence, say anything. She, in due course, in the small, precise idiom of a woman who had not, by external evidence, been kind to her nephew in 11 years, was, by external evidence, kind. She, by external evidence, made him a piece of toast. He, by external evidence, ate the toast. The kitchen, in the small, precise idiom of a kitchen that had been, by external evidence, a kitchen of a particular small, precise idiom for 11 years, was, by external evidence, briefly, a different kitchen. Vernon, in the dining room, did not, by external evidence, register the change. Vernon, by external evidence, had not been in the kitchen in any meaningful sense for 43 years. Vernon, by external evidence, would not, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had, by external evidence, been a small, precise idiom of a man for 43 years, register the change in the small, precise idiom of a kitchen for the entire summer. Vernon, on the evening of the 6th of August, did, by external evidence, attempt the only small, precise idiom of a man he had, by external evidence in his careful private accounting, been planning for 10 months to attempt. He attempted, by external evidence, a backhand. The boy, by external evidence, did not flinch. The boy did not, by external evidence, need to flinch. The boy, by external evidence, had, in the careful private accounting of a mark on a child, the small, precise idiom of a debt that the world owed him, that the world, by external evidence, was paying. The backhand, in the small, precise idiom of a backhand, did not, by external evidence, reach the boy. The backhand, in the small, precise idiom of a backhand that had been intended for an 11-year-old child, found, in the small, careful idiom of returns, a different door. The door it found, by external evidence, was the door of the dining room, on which Vernon Dursley's right knuckles were, by external evidence, traveling at the precise velocity of a backhand intended for a child. Vernon Dursley's right hand, on contact with the door of the dining room, broke. It broke, by external evidence, in 3 places. The breakage was, by external evidence, the small, careful, precise idiom of a hand that had been intended for an 11-year-old child, and had, in the small, careful idiom of returns, found a different door, at threefold weight. Vernon Dursley, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had, by external evidence, been a small, precise idiom of a man for 43 years, sat down, in the dining room on the floor, with his right hand at his chest, and made, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had not, in the small, precise idiom of his life, ever made a noise of this kind in the dining room of his own house, a noise. Petunia, in the kitchen, by external evidence, did not, by external evidence, come in. Dudley, in the living room, by external evidence, did not, by external evidence, come in. Harry, in the kitchen, by external evidence, did not, by external evidence, come in. Vernon, on the floor of the dining room, sat for a long minute by himself. He did not, by external evidence, attempt a backhand again. He did not, by external evidence, attempt anything against the boy again. He, in the small, precise idiom of a man who had, by external evidence, been a small, precise idiom of a man for 43 years, decided in the small private theater behind his face that the boy was, by his own private accounting, not in his own house, a small precise idiom of his own. The boy, by external evidence, was a small precise idiom of someone else's. He did not, by external evidence, ask whose. He, by external evidence, by long practice, was the kind of man who did not, in the small precise idiom of his private accounting, want to know. The summer after the 6th of August was, by external evidence, a different summer. Petunia, by external evidence, in the careful precise idiom of a woman who had, by external evidence in the kitchen on the second day, looked at her nephew, was by external evidence in the small precise idiom of her interactions with her nephew, kind. She was not by external evidence in the small precise idiom of all of her other interactions, particularly kind. She was in the small precise idiom of her interactions with her nephew, kind. The kindness was by long practice, the kind of kindness that was, by long practice, the careful precise idiom of a woman who had, in the small private theater behind her face, 11 years of arrears. She did not by external evidence pay the arrears. She, in the small precise idiom of a woman who had, by external evidence, 11 years of arrears, paid by long practice on a small precise idiom of a payment plan. The payment plan was in the small precise idiom of a payment plan, the kindness. Harry, in the small private theater behind his face, registered the kindness. He, in the small private theater behind his face, in the careful precise idiom of an 11-year-old boy who had been 11 for 10 months, did not, by external evidence, react. In the small private theater behind his face, he in due course was, by external evidence, kind back. The kindness back was, by external evidence, his. It was, in the small precise idiom of his own quick read, not the mark. The mark, by external evidence, did not, by long practice, reach his hands. The kindness back, by external evidence, by long practice, did. On the night of the 8th of August, in the second bedroom on the second floor of number 4 Privet Drive, Harry, by external evidence, sat on the edge of a bed that, by external evidence, had been, in the small precise idiom of his year, the first bed of his own that he had, by external evidence in the careful private accounting of his 11 years, had. He, by external evidence, did not, by external evidence, sleep. He, by external evidence, did several quick rational things in quick succession. He, in due course, raised his eyes. She was, by external evidence, in the doorway. She, by external evidence, was the woman in the long charcoal dress, severe at the throat and severe at the wrist, with hair the color of old pewter, with empty hands, with no shadow. He, by external evidence, did not, by external evidence, react. Harry Potter, lady, I have, by long practice, come to see you. Yes. I will not, by long practice, be a frequent visitor. Yes, I have, by long practice, a small careful thing to tell you, child. May I tell it? Yes. She came in the small precise idiom of a woman who, in the small precise idiom of her arrival, did not, by external evidence, walk in. She, by external evidence, sat on the edge of the bed beside him. She, by external evidence, did not, by external evidence, touch him. Child, yes, this is not a gift, I know. It was not, by long practice, a gift on the morning I placed it, I know. It is, by long practice, a debt the world owed you that I, in the small precise idiom of a particular kind of accountant, made the world pay. I know, lady. You may, in the years that follow this one, use the rest of your life as you choose. You may be, by long practice, kind. You may be, by long practice, cruel. You may be, by long practice, a small precise idiom of a great many things. The mark, by long practice, will not, by external evidence, care. The mark, by long practice, will only, by external evidence, register what is done to you, and the mark, by long practice, will pay it. I know. The mark cannot, by long practice, be taken back. I know, lady. You will, in the years that follow this one, be visited, by long practice, by my colleagues. You will, by long practice, be left, in the careful precise idiom of an Olympic courtesy, to live. Thank you, lady. She looked at him. She, in the small private theater behind her face, did not, by external evidence, do anything. She, in due course, in the small careful precise idiom of a being who had, by long practice, been a being of a particular kind for several thousand years, did, by external evidence, allow herself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to touch him on the top of the head in the precise place Petunia, on the morning of his 8th birthday, had once placed her own hand and then very deliberately withdrawn it. She, in due course, said very quietly, "Good night, Harry. Good night, lady." She was, by external evidence, no longer on the bed. She was, by external evidence, no longer in the room. Harry, on the bed, by external evidence, did not, by external evidence, move for a long minute. In the small private theater behind his face, he in due course allowed himself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to be 11. He in due course lay down. He in due course slept. Above the chimney of number 4 Privet Drive, on a draught of warm August wind, a black owl turned once on the night air and was gone. In a chamber on Olympus, on a balcony with no rail, 4 figures had a brief conversation. Apollo: yes, your verdict. He's going to be insufferable in about 3 years. Hermes: yes, your verdict. He's going to be magnificent. Hades: he's going to be alive. The 4th chair was, by external evidence, briefly occupied. Themis, in the careful, balanced idiom of a being who, by long practice, was always balanced, said, "It is balanced, it was time." She, by external evidence, was no longer in the chair. Below them, at a distance, in a darker chair, in a colder room, the 5th figure, by external evidence, did not, by external evidence, look up. She had, by long practice, her ledger. She had, by long practice, her column. She had, by long practice, a name at the top of a new page. The name had been, by long practice, 11 years and 10 months, and by her count, 3,079 separate items long. One of the items had, by external evidence, in June, been paid. The rest were, by long practice, still owed. She drew, beneath the most recent entry, a small line. She began to add, "In the post on the morning of the 9th of August, Harry, by external evidence, received 3 letters. The first letter was from Hermione. The first letter was, in the careful, steady idiom of Hermione's first letters, in cipher, with a small, careful, precise reading list and 3 citations, and a small, careful, precise paragraph at the end that had been, by external evidence, the small, careful, precise paragraph of a girl who had been in the small private theater behind her face, very afraid for him for some weeks, and was, by external evidence, allowing herself, for the small interval of an exhalation, to no longer be. The second letter was from Ron. The second letter was, in the careful, steady idiom of Ron's first letters, in a different cipher, with 2 jokes Ron's older brothers had taught him, with the careful, precise idiom of a boy who had been, by long practice, raised by 4 older brothers, and a postscript at the end that read, "Mum says you can come stay any time. The burrow is, by long practice, a barn mate. You'll like it." The third letter, by external evidence, was unsigned. The third letter, by external evidence, was on a small piece of parchment that smelled faintly of sea salt. The third letter, by external evidence, in the small, precise idiom of green ink, said, "Tell no one. Read in private. Burn in the kitchen sink." He read it in private. He burned it in due course in the kitchen sink. He, in the small private theater behind his face, did not, by external evidence, react. In the small private theater behind his face, he very carefully did. He, in the small private theater behind his face, was, by external evidence, the kind of boy who, by long practice, was, by external evidence, a small, precise idiom of someone who had, by external evidence, in the careful, precise idiom of his summer, been spoken to by a courier in green ink. He, in due course, did not, by external evidence, do anything. He kept in the lining of his trunk, between the 3rd coin and the 50-pence piece, the small, careful, precise mental copy of what the letter had said. The letter had said, in green ink, exactly 17 words. The 17 words were, by external evidence, the small, precise idiom of a courier who had been, by long practice, the careful, steady idiom of a courier for several thousand years, and was, by external evidence, in the careful, precise idiom of a courtesy, leaving him in the careful, precise idiom of a young mortal in the 2nd summer of his marked life, a small, careful, precise instruction for the school year that was, by external evidence, in due course, going to begin. He kept the 17 words, by external evidence, in the small private theater behind his face, where he, by external evidence, was the kind of boy who, by long practice, kept, in the small private theater behind his face, the small, careful, precise idiom of a great many things. In the 2nd bedroom on the 2nd floor of number 4 Privet Drive, on the night of the 9th of August, on a draught of warm August wind, a small black owl that did not, by external evidence, exist, turned once on the night air outside the window, and was, by external evidence, gone. Harry on the bed slept. Chapter 7 end.